Good afternoon. Welcome to the November meeting of the Planning Committee of City of York Council. Just a few administrative things. If the members would please turn their phones to silent or turn them off, and if members of the public could do the same, I'd be grateful. There are no fire alarms planned that I'm aware of, so if the fire alarm goes off, it's a real event. You go out through that door and then out of the building and meet outside the hotel. Okay, Councillor Pavlovitz.
Thank you, Chair. Point of order, and you are aware this is coming, so I'm not ambushing you. It was a point of order. Chair, as Vice Chair, I have received submissions from several members of this committee regarding comments you made at the last planning meeting regarding your position in respect of Greenbelt applications coming before this committee, which are now on public record. By stating that you would, and I quote, go to hell in a handcart before approving an application in the Greenbelt, and then subsequently, when this was raised at the time by myself and others, that you probably were predetermined, and for reference, this issue occurred at 2 hours 35 on the webcast, there have to be concerns whether you can meet the Planning Committee Code of Practice that says if you cannot hear any application with an open mind, you should recuse yourself from that application. Given that we have two matters this afternoon relating to possible Greenbelt applications, can this committee, or indeed the public, be assured that you are indeed looking at these matters with an open mind? Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I will respond to that. I have received and considered advice from the monitoring officer and would like to absolutely clarify my position. There have been 4 cases in the last 4 years when I have voted for Greenbelt applications. The most recent in July 2021, when I both spoke in favour and voted for the DPD application on Northminster Park. Prior to that, in November 2020, I moved approval of a Greenbelt development in my own ward. I went then to Rydale District Council and asked them to approve the other half of the development as well. Now, I don't think that is the action of somebody who is predetermined to oppose Greenbelt developments. I've only voted for refusal on a Greenbelt application once. That was on the Trenchard Road application, and that decision was subsequently confirmed by a planning inspector. My comments at the last meeting were meant to imply that I would vote for a Greenbelt application in the circumstances when the case was very special circumstances have been clearly made, and there are no technical reasons not to do so. In this case, the Dunnington application, I was not entirely convinced by some aspects of the application, so I chose to abstain. And I made that decision only when it was clear that on putting the matter to the vote, it was approved by the other members, because 9 people put their hands up. And at that point, I took the opportunity to abstain. I might have used the wrong phrase to express my deep predisposition. I said, did say predetermination? I confused that with predisposition against Greenbelt applications. But predisposition is the correct position to be on a Greenbelt application because there is a presumption in the NPPF against Greenbelt developments. However, when very special circumstances are demonstrated, I'm completely open to voting for Greenbelt applications, as my voting record demonstrates. I would also point out that I was suffering from side effects of the new course of medication and was not feeling well, so I may not have stated exactly what I intended to do. I've also taken external legal advice which clarifies any statement should not be taken out of the context it was made regarding that Dunnington application. I reiterate my voting record, which is entirely in the public domain and not possible to dispute, demonstrates I have no history of predetermination against Greenbelt applications, and I will continue to approach each application with a completely open mind, making my decision on the evidence presented. Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that statement. Given that we have the monitoring officer virtually in attendance, could I ask her whether she would concur with the statement that you've just made, indicating that you are not predetermined?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. Yes. As the Council's monitoring officer, I can confirm that I have provided advice to Councillor Fisher, and the content of that advice does remain confidential. As all councillors are aware, the Localism Act duty does rest with individual councillors, and in this instance, Councillor Fisher, to consider and decide whether or not he has a conflict of interest and or a predetermined view in respect of the Greenbelt matter. It is not for me to determine whether he has a conflict or not.
Thank you. Right, that's having been dealt. I'm quite happy I don't have it, and therefore I will not be declaring interest on those grounds in any of the applications tonight. Thank you. If we can now move on, we have to now move to the matter of first of all, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Lomas, and we have Councillor Fitzpatrick, who is very welcome as a substitute. Moving on from that, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest in any of the items on tonight's agenda? Councillor Looker.
I just think it should be noted that as Lord Mayor, I opened the building site of the gasworks, and I was presented with a very nice inscribed trowel, which has is now decorating the windowsill in the hall. And I feel I don't think it's predetermined my decision making on this at all. But in the interests of transparency, I thought you ought to know that I did receive this gift from the developers, but I treat it as purely ceremonial. I don't think it's actually going to be very functional.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think this is prejudicial or personal in terms of an interest, but I will declare for transparency purposes that I did, at the request of residents, call in an earlier application on the gasworks site for the mast, but I don't feel that that necessarily has any bearing on what we're going to discuss tonight. Thank you.
Are there any other declarations? I have one. I have to declare an interest in both items 4A and 4B. It's a personal non-pecuniary interest on the grounds that both Huntington School may be the beneficiary of Section 106 money. Although I'm no longer employed there, I was retired over 10 years ago. I am hoping to restart work there as a volunteer in their COVID recovery programme. So I think I should mention that for transparency. Okay, moving on to the minutes. Minutes are available on page 3 to 12. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious as to why we're a month behind with the minutes. Last month's meeting, if it had been minuted and in this agenda, would have concerned some very pertinent points relevant to today's applications. So it is concerning that we're running a month behind.
Right, I've just been advised by office they'll be available as soon as possible.
So what's the procedure going forward for the next meeting? Are we still going to be a month behind with minutes, or are we going to be caught up at some point?
Sorry. Right, so September and October minutes will be on the next month's. Sorry, the October and November will be on the next month's agenda, I'm assured. And I hope that will get us back into line as we should be. Thank you very much. Okay, are there any matters concerning the minutes, or would somebody like to move approval thereof and move receipt of them? Councillor Barker moves approval. Is that seconded? Councillor Gore. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Those minutes are approved. I'll sign them at the end of the meeting, if that's okay. Moving on now to the next item, which is public participation. Now, we don't have any speakers to speak on the general remit of the committee, as far as I'm aware, so we'll take the public speakers before each actual individual application. Okay, so we now move on to item 4, which is 2 appeals. Would you like to introduce them, if possible?
Thank you, Chair. Before I start on both 4A and 4B, I think there's need for a point of clarification that members aren't actually making a decision on the applications in front of you because they are both subject to non-determination appeals. So that now means that the decision lies with the Secretary of State. So what us as officers are asking you to do is to endorse the recommendations that officers have given you as part of the report. So I will go to item 4A first. I'll just talk you through the plans and then I'll do the additional information. So we can see the site location plan here. Hopefully you can see my red dot there. Can you see it? Excellent. So you can see the red line boundary here. I'm just going around there. The next slide, just a second. There we go. That gives you a wider context of the application site. So you can see there's Monk's Cross Link Road here and the existing residential properties along here. The application is outlined with access. So this is an indicative master plan. It may not look like this when the application comes forward. This is just to show how it could look like if it was to come forward through the reserved matters that way. There is, however, details of the Monk's Cross northern access, because as I said, access is to be considered. So you've got your roundabout here, a further roundabout here, which you can see outlined. And again, a further access into the site from a roundabout here. There is also a woodland way proposed pedestrian and cycle access that you can see along here. I will go back to the main plan while I just talk you through the additional information. So we have, as part of your additional information, there's a representation from the Helmsley Group, which I'll just refer you to there in your additional information. There's also, I've just got some verbal clarification for you. It's a correction for paragraph 5.3. Members should note that the approach taken in policy H14 regarding Greenbelt in the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan states that in whether to treat the land as Greenbelt in advance of the adoption of the local plan will be in accordance with the Wedgwood judgment and taking into account the RSS general extent of the Greenbelt, the draft local plan 2005, the emerging local plan and the site specific features. The policy also states that the general extent of the Greenbelt inappropriate development will not be supported except in very special circumstances. New buildings are regarded as inappropriate development and will not be supported other than in the circumstances identified in the National Planning Policy Framework. And that's it for your update from me.
Okay,
thank you.
Are there any members' questions? Could I just ask you, in the interest of brevity, it could be quite a long agenda, to keep things succinct and make sure we stick to actual planning matters, please, if possible. Councillor.
Just a quick question of clarification. I think that probably shows it. There's a mention in the report to land that isn't owned, it's owned by different developers have an option. Is that section in the middle? And roughly how many homes would that equate to? Because the whole site was master planned at 970 in the local plan. Obviously, this is 970 excluding that. What would be the potential increase if that land was also developed?
Lindsay, do you know that? The case officer's in the background, in the east. She's on Zoom. Don't worry, she's not behind you. She's in. Lindsay, do you know that by any chance?
Hi everyone. Lindsay Jenkins, Development Management Officer. I don't have that information as to how many sites could be developed on that land. The whole site is the allocation of circa 970, but the application comes in for 970 dwellings. So I'm afraid I don't have that information.
We can try and work it out for you in the meantime. Yeah, we can. Lindsay, if you can find out the hectares, we'll work it out from there.
No, it's not a supplementary, Chair. It's a. I think some people had their hands up before me.
Thanks, Chair. It was just in terms of the pedestrian cycle access to Woodland Way, is it at the bottom? That's outside the red line. Are there any sort of land ownership issues with that that potentially would cause issues further down the line, or?
That's in your additional information there, that the Hemsley Group are prepared to allow bicycle and footpath access so long as they are adequately compensated, but we're in the process of working.
That's Alpha Court, I think, talking about.
Oh, sorry,
The east.
which one?
So Alpha Court, I think, is the one that comes off south, which
Right.
Hemsley Group want paying for access to help. I think
Yeah.
what Councillor Holly was referring to is to, if you're
This
coming
one.
out, the site doesn't extend to any of those eastern points. So would there,
Yeah, it's the
Right,
would there be an issue trying to access?
Helen Verger, I'm the highway officer for City of York Council. You're asking the question about Garth Road and Garth Lane, is that correct? Sorry.
no, sorry, it's the link to Woodland Way. You can
Woodland
see
Way.
The three dashed lines. At
Yeah,
the
so
bottom
this
there.
is all in under the control of the applicant. Basically, they've got some agreements to get this link
Okay.
open.
That's fantastic.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask for clarification? I think might help members that when this application actually came into the council and why we end up with this as a non-determination appeal. I think many of us are not absolutely clear on that initial process, and it might help us today. Thank you.
2018 is when it was originally submitted. Is that right, Lindsay? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, okay, so there's obviously been the issue around the local plan and progression of the local plan. And there's also been some technical issues to resolve that have taken some time. We still haven't quite got the technical issues fully resolved with highways, but we're much closer than we were. So that altogether has meant why it has been in the system for quite a long time. Not ideal, but that's we have had to work through that situation.
Is it supplementary, Councillor?
It is related, yes, Chair. The suggestion in the agenda item that the council hasn't been able to make a decision in terms of, well, bringing forward for determining because of information that's still awaited, and including on page 20, paragraphs 3.5 in forward planning. And it suggests there's various information relating to the provision of policies. When was that information asked for?
Lindsay, sorry, can you answer that one?
Sorry, can you just repeat the paragraph that is being referred to, please?
Yeah, paragraph 3.5, page 20. In the forward planning part.
The policy comments are quite recent ones. Once we had the submission of the planning appeal, prior to that, we were always in discussion with the applicants. But these are updated policy comments, so they're very recent. Is there some specific information that's requested? So I heard part of the question, but I didn't hear it all.
I think what the last sentence is the most important one. It may be that these matters can be satisfactorily conditioned to ensure the provisions of these policies are met. So anything that we consider can be covered by a condition, because it is an outline and it's quite a big outline, we usually do cover quite a lot of these matters by condition, and anything where we're not 100%, that's not the right wording. Anything where we haven't got all the information we'll require, we're still working with the applicant at this point in time. That's mostly around the highways issues, but we are still in discussions with them regarding that.
What I'm trying to get is whether it's information that's been delayed by the applicant or whether it's the council that's been slow with this. bearing in mind we've had previously, I think it was the early summer application for Askham Bryan College, where the applicant was complaining about the length of time it was to get responses from the council. I just wondered whether there's been any issues along those lines.
I think this is a very different application for a significant number of homes, and yes, it has taken some time, but that can be expected when your local plan is at a stage where ours is, and when the application's put in, it's maybe not all the technical issues aren't resolved. So I don't think you can solely put the blame on either party. It's something that we've been looking to resolve over time, but unfortunately we haven't got to that point before the non-determination's been put in.
Thank you.
I think it's just in terms of reasons why we're having it for predetermination now. Am I correct in thinking if the local plan had been in place by now, this would be not an application within the Greenbelt and therefore a relatively straightforward approval. And the applicant probably would have preferred this to go through with it not being in the Greenbelt and therefore more straightforward approval. What's probably happened is they've decided they need it to be brought forward now. They would have rather it was taken out of the Greenbelt first. But as it hasn't happened, that's why we've now got it as a predetermination.
I can't put words in their mouth, but yes, I would imagine that's their considerations.
No, thank you. I hope this isn't an inappropriate question, but it's around the density. Can you put the next slide up? That one, yes. On paragraph 3.19, it states a lower density rural village character is suggested for the northern part of the site. That doesn't suggest to me that there's much change between the northern, southern or eastern elements of the site. And can I just ask about the overall densities? Are they similar to similar estates in the immediate area?
That's indicative, so it might not look like that. That's just to show how they could be achieved on site. It may be once there is reserved matters come in, because the reserved matters might come in stages, they might all come at once. That's the developer to bring forward, but that is just to show how it could be achieved. It might not look like that.
Sorry, let me put it another way then.
Okay.
Is the density of 970 properties for that size of site something that the LPA would consider to be appropriate for that type of setting, which is, as you say, semi-rural, rural village character?
This site as a whole is considered to be able to achieve that level of provision of housing. That's what it was allocated for as part of the local plan. The local plan will envisage that there is open space as part of it. Whether or not it'll work exactly like this, we don't know at this point in time, but what we are looking at is the principle of this amount of dwellings on this site, and we do consider that that is acceptable a density.
Yes, I have. I mean, if you look at the site, it says 16 dwellings per hectare, which is, sorry, the actual bottom of page 14 says the density is 16 dwellings per hectare, but that whole site includes the country park, which obviously is there for net biodiversity gain and amenity space and so on. So it is a site that does include a lot of open space.
Thank you. Paragraph 4.6 refers to self-build, and it's noted that Redrow are opting out of the 5% allocation, yet on their master plan, it shows an area for self-build. Can I infer from that they will actually further develop that privately?
Lindsay, can you do that one, please?
Yeah, so the comments in 4.6 of the report were submitted in 2018 when the application first came in, and Redrow have now offered, as the master plan suggests, some areas for self-build, and it's included within the report that the policy requirement would be 5% of the allocation, which I think equates to 49 homes, if I'm correct. So they are proposing an area for self-build and custom build housing at the moment.
Thank you. Yes, on top of page 35, there's reference to demonstrate all transport issues have been addressed in consultation with the council, and I'm not sure why Highways England, because they don't have any highways in the immediate area, but nevertheless, that's included. Looking at that plan, the link road, which runs top to bottom of the plan, effectively is more or less contained within the boundary of the site. So the question, which is not, it's not clear in here, whether we would be seeking, whether or not we would be seeking an LTN 120 compliant cycle route along through the development from north to south, particularly looking at two roundabouts, which are not very friendly for cycle infrastructure, and whether we would be actually expecting that to be provided, and if not, why not?
At present, we've not been looking to secure this type of facility. We have been trying to secure cycle routes to Monks Cross and to Huntington to serve the site. So the proposals are for a cycle route which is almost LTN 120 compliant between Monks Cross and the first roundabout that you see. And then a cycle route would go through the site rather than continue on the link road. What we were hoping to secure, and we've been discussing for years now with the developers, is the direct link to Monks Cross through Alpha Court, and then the direct link to Huntington through Garth Road, Garth Lane. But obviously, this has been now taken away from the proposals.
So can we add that to the list of issues that we would be seeking? You know, presumably we're making representations at the appeal, and possibly bearing in mind as reference in paragraph 5.26 and 27 to the work on the ring road, which will have sustainable transport links. Obviously, it'd be important to link that in through this development for any provision that might be provided as part of the dual link.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably a question for Helen. At the north end of the site, there's a proposed vehicular access from North Lane. I just wondered if there'd been any discussions with the developers around the necessity for that vehicular access, and if if there have been discussions, would that access point provide access to the entire development? Or would there be strategically placed bollards so that it would avoid rat running of people coming onto the estate via that route rather than via the two main entrances from the link road?
Thank you. At the moment, the developers are not proposing to have any system of filtering or plug, but we have been asking for this because we feel there's a high risk of rat running through the site. So again, that's something that we're discussing with them. We would prefer the northern access to be used by a few houses located to the north of the site, but then a model filter enabling only cyclists and pedestrians to go through rather than vehicular access as well.
Thank you, Chair. I'll follow on with Helen as well. I had two questions around transport. That section of the Monks Cross Link Road declaring an interest as a ward councillor whose residents use that as the main access to the Northern Ring Road. Having that area of open space to the right, which is fantastic for the people that live there and the access across there, that will attract a significant amount of people from outside the area to use that. There is already an issue towards the south of that Monks Cross Link Road with people parking as an access to Monks Cross as a sort of an overflow car park to Monks Cross. That is a key route. If you start to add on to that as well, people parking and dog walking, as alerted to me by the reference to Strensall Common, I couldn't see anything in there in terms of how you would regulate parking, WL lines. Obviously, the traffic reduction in speed will help in terms of making it safe to cross, but I would consider putting WL lines or something along that to prevent parking.
So at this stage, we've not considered all the TR questions because that's quite detailed. We would expect a condition, but I have been asking the developers for actual parking provision for the public open space. Because at the moment there is nothing, and there's also very poor cycling and walking access to the public open space, to be fair. So that's another question that we've been trying to resolve.
And then my second one was at the bottom of page 35. Again, just the ward council, the reference to the good old number 12 bus. Now, the number 12 bus has been a live topic for some period, and it's basically the remnants probably of 5 or 6 different bus routes that have gone over the period of time, and all have been linked up. And so now that primarily serves as a way of getting people to Monk's Cross from various disparate parts of the city, including Heworth, without Haxby and various places. Is there not any way with this development you could actually start to get a more sustainable bus route that runs from there to the town centre, which would then maybe pick up some of those routes that the number 12 doesn't need to do, which then could, for example, the number 12 could just go from Haxby to Monk's Cross and into town and not have to loop around Heworth, Stockton and various other places that a secondary bus route could do.
Yes, I think number 12 was mentioned, but I think the idea would be to review the provision. But what we've been trying to do is secure sufficient contribution to actually enable us to have a decent bus service. At the moment, we do not have an agreement on this either.
Thank you, Chair. Top of page 41, paragraph 5.55. I'm intrigued that once again, we seem to be thinking it's acceptable to take an off-site contribution for gypsy pitches. I seem to remember we took off-site contributions from civil service for 2. There was off-site contributions off York Central for 6 or 9. I can't really remember that figure. And there's another 3 pitches here. There's been no alternative land identified for those off-site contributions. And what better place to actually put 3 pitches than on the country park area? Urban fringe, easy access. So I'm just intrigued as to why officers consider it acceptable to take 3 pitch contribution here of 450,000, seemingly without any alternative land identified, when we've got a perfect site here.
I think in the first instance, we're being consistent with the other decisions we've made, as you've just identified, York Central and other ones. We have asked for contributions, and when we secure the contributions, there is a given time period in which we then can look to spend the money on the pitches, and hopefully that will come forward as at some point in the future. Sorry, Councillor, I think he wants a supplementary to.
As someone who's been through that process of call for sites, for travel sites for some period of time, I think it's not the prerequisite of that, Becky, that someone has to make their land available and offer it available. We can't actually stipulate that it goes on a particular area of somebody else's land.
Councillor Waters again.
Thank you, Chair, but surely it says in here, in line with the MPPF, including on-site or on alternative land. Now, you're saying that we're being consistent, but you said York Central wasn't practical. I argued at the time that the civil service site was another perfect opportunity to have on-site provision, and here is obviously a perfect site. So is it the consistency of officers that there will never ever be on-site provision? Is that the consistent?
I think that's it. I mean, if we were offered it on site, we'd have to look at whether or not it was an option. Yes, we're trying to be consistent, but yes, we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and negotiate with the applicant. Yes, it is a difficult one, but in this case, we have taken the view that the 3 pitches and the contribution is the best way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you, Chair. On this indicative master plan, is the area that's designated 5 play? Is that the area that's optioned by another developer, or is it a different area?
Next
to 7. Sure. Somebody point.
Is it there?
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking.
Yes.
So if that's obviously not in the ownership of the applicant. Well, would be soon to be applicant. will that therefore leave enough green space for a development? Should that be developed out, will there be therefore enough green space for a development of that size? If you lose area 5.
And Lindsay, can you just, I'm presuming it would be, given the amount of open space at this side and down here, but I'll just double check with the case officer.
Yes, thank you, Becky. I've not got any details, any up-to-date details of the allocations of different areas of public open space or play pitches or the country park, but it's fairly in line. It follows on the policy requirements of having the green wedge to the west of the site next to Huntington. And I'm sure with the country park as well, there is there is enough space. And obviously a lot of these matters can be drawn out through reserved matters in terms of the detail layout and the play areas and how they all function together in the residential development.
Thank you. So therefore, if the area across from the link road is owned by the developers, can this be one of those things that you take to the examination process, the appeal process, that can't be subsequently developed out? Because then there's going to be very, very little green space.
Well, I think at this point in time, it's that this site can achieve the number of dwellings, and there's still an expectation of this green wedge as part of that. That's part of the allocation. Stop me if I'm wrong, Lindsay. That's right, isn't it? It does say that it specifically requires that.
Yes, the country park is required to mitigate the impacts from Strenshaw Common. There's a Strenshaw Common zone, and this development, along with other allocated sites, fall within that. And the country park is to mitigate the recreational impacts on Strenshaw Common. So there will be, we are in discussions and negotiations with the developers in terms of Section 106 agreeing a management plan and for the country park and how that's managed, along with the playing pitches and anything else, which will be for a significant period of time to allow that to be retained. But it's quite clear in the policy SS10 about the requirement for the country park.
Thank you. Councillor Hollier next, and then Councillor Douglas.
I've got a supplementary.
Oh, sorry. No, said so.
No.
Oh, sorry, supplementary.
I suspect, Councillor Parris, and I should know this, I suspect the Greenbelt boundary will be the Monks Cross Links Road, and what they've actually done is include land outside, so they didn't have to provide it with inside. But that you did flag me on that one, and I'm starting to think now. Is that red line, is that actually along the line of the number 7, which is sort of the secondary, the land that's not in control of the developer? Is that, yeah, if you flip back, I mean, is that, you see where there's the 2 hedge lines which they've put in along that boundary? Is it, no, on the, sorry, coming east, west?
That side?
Yeah. So they put the 2 hedge lines in. Is the western hedge line the extent of the, that's east, not the elephant split water?
Sorry, I've got it wrong. Right, okay, yeah, that one.
Is that the hedge line, the boundary to the side, or is it the inside hedge line? Because I think, yes, which is making me think now that that inner hedge line is basically the intended development line for, and that narrow strip between there and the play area is what the second.
Is it possible that I can come in? Sorry, Lindsay Jenkins, Development Management Officer, but yes, it is the line of where number 7 is.
Yeah.
That is the red line. That's where the red line comes around.
And whoever developed that land would have to make some open space provision. So what that is indicating is that they would probably build out that intersection and leave a strip of land between there and the play area.
It would depend, I suppose. It depends on the drainage and other
Why
bits and
else?
pieces, but
Why else would you put a hedge there as a matter of interest?
I don't know. It's indicative is the answer to that. I don't know why that's been put there. But yeah, it would, what you say makes sense, but we can't confirm that.
Right, Councillor Holly, you are.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a question in terms of the relationship between the conclusion and the recommendation and some of the, issues that the planning authority would like resolved or changed through the process. And I guess it's what exactly we're endorsing from the reports, because the recommendation talks about endorsing the conclusions and resolving the issues in 6.2, which is mainly sort of transport issues. Obviously, there's things like, sort of insufficient community space, local shops, things like that, that we'd hope to influence through the appeal process and discuss with the applicant. But I guess if those aren't resolved to our satisfaction and we come back when it's still sort of one relatively small shop, is there still scope to, I guess, refuse the application, or essentially have we kind of endorsed it by accepting it at this point? I guess it's how much scope is there to affect the things not actually mentioned in the recommendations?
Sorry, so I mean, in terms of the recommendation, we've said that there are still highways issues that we need to resolve, and that's what we still intend to do. We intend to go away and resolve them. If we can't, they'll have to be progressed through the inquiry. So that's where we are. But are you asking if there's additional issues that you have?
So, for example, 5.21, offices considered as a single shop providing floor space of 200 square metres is unlikely to be adequate. This will be discussed with the applicant prior to and if necessary at the appeal. If it's discussed and they still don't change their mind, and it comes back later, reserved matters or whatever.
No, I mean, I think, which one are you talking about? 5.2. Hang on, let me find the right bit.
34.
Thank you.
There's, 5.22,
Shop.
a different sort of site for the school prepared, things like that. Yes, so we endorsing the application as it is, otherwise?
No, that is it. Well, we still need to discuss that with the applicant. So I think it's endorsed us to still have those discussions. It might not be in your recommendation, but it is still in this report and we will still pick it up as part of the appeal process.
But it wouldn't fall through the cracks so that later when the reserve matters application came back and it was one small shop, it was kind of, well, you agreed it at the outline?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, but no, it's clear that we still need to have those discussions with the applicant. And it does say, and if necessary, at the appeal. So if we're not happy, that may be something that will progress through the appeal situation. It may be something as simple as that we can add a condition that requires something through the reserve matters, and we might need the applicant to agree with us for that. It's just that we haven't got that resolved at this moment in time, and it would be remiss of us not to say that as part of this report, but we do intend to resolve it.
Would it help to have that written in the recommendation, sort of, as 6.2 and other?
I don't have an issue if you want it amending to add that into it. We can pick that up as part of the appeal process. Yes, we can.
Councillor Melly, I believe you've got a supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Has the planning authority attempted to have those conversations with the applicant, or is that part of the grounds for appeal for the applicants that up for non-determination, that these conversations haven't been had in an attempt to determine?
I'll bring Lindsay in because I know for certain she's been working on it for that amount of time. But yeah, we have had these discussions. It's just not something that we've been able to resolve as yet. Lindsay, there's nothing different to what I've just said, is there?
No, that's it. And I think discussions will still be ongoing come the appeal in terms of that, and securing certain matters that we feel should be addressed at this stage.
Is that further supplementary, or go on then? I'll give you, Councillor Douglas, you're falling further down the list, but I'll get to you as soon as I can.
So if there are matters such as this, where more information is needed to be able to determine an application and the applicant isn't able to provide that information to satisfy the planning authority, then why is that not grounds for refusal rather than grounds to not determine the application?
Because we are still in discussions with the applicant at this time about it. If the applicant turned around and said, we're not going to provide it, then absolutely it would be a reason for refusal. But we are still having those discussions before we get to the appeal to see if we can resolve it. That's absolutely how we should be working. The MPPF is clear that we should work to resolve issues, and that's what we're trying to do, hence why we haven't put it as a reason for refusal. We will still work on it. But if there comes a point, which I'm hoping there won't, between now and when we get to appeal, that we can't resolve it, it will be included as part of the appeal process.
Councillor Pavlovich, there's a supplementary as well.
Yeah, so just to get this clear in my own mind, is we're still being asked to say, in principle, we would support development. However, if something as fundamental as shops are not going to be supplied, will that, in principle, approval that we're giving, would that not carry a lot of weight at the appeal? I mean, could we caveat any decision to support on the proviso that there is sufficient shops and other amenities for that development?
As a planning authority, we're clear that's something that's needed and we are still trying to work on it. So yeah, that's not unreasonable to ask for, and we will continue to do that. What we're asking you as a committee is to look at the principle and acknowledge that there are still outstanding issues that we are still working on, and we will do our best in the meantime to sort them.
Councillor, another supplementary?
Yes, just to clarify that sort of process question going forward, that decision will ultimately be the planning inspectors, I think, won't it? So if the planning inspector feels that the shop isn't big enough, he could apply the conditions as the planning committee would do to say, yes, I approve, but the shop needs to be 400 square feet, not 200 square feet.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Douglas, then Councillor Locker.
Thank you. So another question about facilities. I noticed that there's an ambulance spoke, but there's no provision of doctors or dentists, and has been raised as a concern by local residents. So what conversations have been had around that, and why do we not see any further health provision on site? Thank you.
I'm going to pass this to the case officer, Lindsay, please. I've not been involved in that to that level.
Apologies, just looking for the appropriate part of the report on that. There is a requirement under one of the policies for a health assessment type of all the facilities, which I think was highlighted by the policy team. I think it's under one of the HW5, I think, from my memory. And we are discussions around the ambulance spoke facilities, which is required by one of the conditions in the emerging local plan. That will be subject to discussions with the NHS Foundation Trust and other parties in that. But if it is required, then that could be provided within the site. I think there's adequate space within there. The other matters of health ones, sorry, it was policy HW6. And then we may expect an audit to come in of requesting of existing health facilities to ensure that there is adequate provision within the site. But as part of the application, that's not being provided at this stage. So it is still something to negotiate and to discuss with the applicant.
That will come up as part of the appeal process.
Chair, if I understand it right, this is an application purely for outline planning permission. And an outline planning permission gives huge amount of scope, as we have seen in countless applications before now, to come back with a lot more detail. In fact, to change the whole shape of the site whatsoever. We are really looking at the core infrastructure of roughly where the roads are going to be. And otherwise it is up for an awful lot still, even if this wasn't a subject for an appeal. It would be the basis of lots of coming back. Heavens, I've seen them come back with complete changes of design and everything. We would probably get it back as a full detailed planning application in due course if this whole thing goes ahead. It is at the moment situated technically in the green belt. It is though, however, within the area that we have in the local plan indicated as housing. It meets an awful lot of our need for housing on this particular site. Chair, I think we could move on, couldn't we?
And if members have no further questions, I think we could move into public participation on this now, if that's okay. We have three people who are speaking in public participation on this item. The first speaker is Jeff Beacon, who is speaking in objection. Would like to come forward? You get 3 minutes, Mr. Beacon, if you could sit at the middle one, yeah, that one, and then if you could press your microphone button, I'll give you a warning with 30 seconds to go. See the button marked Mike?
Is that working?
That's working. Away you go.
Good. I think this proposal ought to be rethought. The green belt is not a good argument. It restricts development, raises house prices and development land value, putting up the cost of living, particularly for poorer citizens, and exiling many of them. And much of the green belt is unattractive. Most viewings of this site are by motorists driving by. On a grey autumn day, cycling by this site is unpleasant. Cars whizzing past fields of grungy green. It does not preserve York's special character. The site is currently conventional farming, which must change with the climate emergency. High input, energy intensive farming should be changed to growing local, fresh, low carbon food, increasing local employment. The COP26 methane target also means greatly reduced animal husbandry. Natural England's objection to the loss of best agricultural land now carries very little weight. We can't build for motorists. York's declaration of a climate emergency had a follow-up setting a remaining carbon budget for York. Today, this amounts to 40 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per citizen per year. Oh no, just total per citizen forever. Greenhouse gas emissions for this development are unlikely to be less than those measured for the sustainable Derwentthorpe. These are estimated to be over 14 tonnes of carbon dioxide per resident per year, exceeding York's 40-tonne budget in less than 3 years. The main problem is car ownership. Derwentthorpe provided more than one car space per dwelling. This scheme proposes more. As the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee has said, in the long term, widespread personal vehicle ownership does not appear to be compatible with significant decarbonisation. This proposal against York's declaration of a climate emergency and also convenes the National Planning Policy Framework, which incorporates UN Resolution 42187.
This says we shouldn't screw the world up for future generations. Rethink this development.
You have 30
Show the
seconds,
world a
please.
better way. No private cars, not even electric ones, which create enormous emissions in their manufacture. On an international note, as it's COP26 time, I hope York can show developers in China how to avoid the carbon-intensive lifestyles of the USA. Sadly, they are halfway there already.
Thank you. If you just wait a second, are there any members who would like to ask Mr. Beacon any questions? No, in that case, I thank you very much for your contribution.
Did I win then?
That's it.
What is that? Did I beat the panel?
You did beat the panel, yes. You don't get a furry toy or something like that. But okay, our second speaker tonight is David Gregg, who is speaking about the use of the porter cabins, buildings for brass bands rehearsal and the noise created. Okay, Mr. Gregg, have you found the microphone button?
It's green.
It is green. Then we're ready to go. You have 3 minutes. I'll give you a warning at 30
Before
seconds.
I start, I must apologise. I've got a sore throat and a bit of a cough. So, but I am clean. Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Gregg, and I am the chairman of the Shepherd Group Brass Band. I sent a letter to yourselves on the 21st of the 3rd, 2018, pointing out that several nights a week and occasionally at weekends, the band rehearse in a building provided by our sponsors, the Shepherd Group, located in the very northeast corner of the porter cabin site, adjacent to the southwest boundary of the new development. Sound leakage will always occur, especially at the moment as we are leaving the doors open for extra ventilation. The windows are fixed. We have been using this facility since 2003. Apart from regular rehearsals, we also provide large amounts of tutoring and music lessons for a great many youngsters and adults. This is an incredibly rare amenity these days. We have more than 150 playing members in our 5 bands, most of whom live in and around York, who wish to keep playing without any hindrances. The Shepherd Group is one of York's major employees and greatly favours its sponsorship of the Shepherd Group Brass Band organisation. A noise survey was carried out by Liz Bates on the 16th of March 2018. She is the Principal Air Quality Officer of the City of York Council. The feedback to ourselves was that on the night in question, during a top band rehearsal, sound could be heard some 80 metres away. I have scaled the proposal provided by the developers, and the nearest dwellings appear to be some 55 to 60 metres away. Our sound would therefore encroach on the new residents. I am therefore concerned that there will be noise complaints received. It is important to us that both brass band playing and its education is not prejudiced in this manner. As you all should be aware, both local and national planning authorities work under the NPPF, which states in paragraph 123 that, and I quote, planning and decisions should aim to avoid noise giving rise to significant
Mr. Gregg.
adverse impacts of health and quality of life as a result of the new developments. I would suggest that another noise survey by the developers is carried out on either a Tuesday or Friday evening at an agreed band date when our loudest band rehearsing, and that any significant noise outcomes, sorry, 10 seconds, should be focused on sound attenuation in whatever form, whether it be a bund, acoustic fencing, or a redesign of the housing layout by and at the cost of the developer. Thank you. you have any
Thank you.
questions?
Are there any questions? For
Sorry.
Mr. Gregg?
Sorry, Chairman.
I'll do that one.
I am the chairman as well, but brass band. I get used to it.
Any questions? No question? Oh, Councillor Waters.
Just a question for Becky while gentleman's here. Would this be a point that could be taken forward at the inquiry as to some form of landscaping to actually block out the sound? Not that it's a particularly unpleasant sound, and you might get people moving in that like it, but there must be a way of mitigating it without and take this worry away.
Can I speak, Chair?
I can't let the officers please answer. Sorry,
I used to work.
Please speak.
Oh, sorry.
That's the question.
Given that we don't know exactly where the properties are going, that would be something that would be covered by the reserve matters. We'd look at that at the reserve matter stage. It may well be that some form of landscaping, some form of bund might be an appropriate way, but at this moment in time, given that it's not for the siting of the dwellings, we couldn't put that forward at this moment in time.
Councillor Waters again.
So going back to Mr. Gregg, would he be quite happy to work with council officers to come up with a mutually acceptable solution? Yep.
Mike.
Microphone.
Put your microphone on.
Possibly, does it? Oh, right. Technology. We had a similar situation with the development further to the west, where the new housing was developed. And I used to work at Portakabin then. And we worked with the council, we worked with the developers, and they put an acoustic fencing up there. They were supposed to put up a bund as well, but that never seemed to happen as well, a landscape bund. Could I possibly point out on the map where our building is?
Southwest corner is just down there, isn't it?
It's
Can you see it better on that one?
yes, you can actually see it. Can you see where that long white line goes from? That is our car park. If you go to the top of there, move to your right there. That is the building we practice in there. It's been provided specifically by the Shepherd Group via Portakabin.
Can I thank you? That matter will be addressed at a later stage, almost certainly.
And Councillor Looker, who has been to our concerts, thank you. I'm sure she can second the volume that you can get out of a brass band.
Right. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution.
My pleasure.
We'll take that into account either at this application or at a later date.
Thank you.
Our third speaker is Councillor Keith Orrell, who is one of the ward councillors. I think you know the routine, Councillor Orrell, don't you?
I think so, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. My comments are supported by my ward colleagues, Councillor Runciman and Councillor Coolidge. The principle for this development was made when it was agreed as part of the local plan in 2018. This was reinforced when the Huntington neighbourhood plan was supported by 87% of Huntington residents and then agreed by our council's executive. There was no opposition from any political party or the other groups to the neighbourhood plan. This does not, of course, mean that an application should automatically get approval. The application has to deal effectively with the issues that affect our area. First, flooding. Any development around York can potentially have an impact, and this land is a water retention area. While the land is not directly adjacent to a river, it's important that the measures to deal with this are effective. Another impact for our area is traffic generation. Red Road have been congratulated in relation to the public consultation they carried out. It was as good as I've known, with a number of opportunities for local people to get involved. Regrettably, Red Road have not fully listened to residents. There is a general objection to an exit on North Lane from ward councillors, Huntington Parish Council and residents, yet it is still included in the application. We cannot see a need for this exit. And looking at the response from our traffic team, there are still many issues to resolve. We would expect that conditions are placed on the application to ensure maximum opportunities for walking and cycling to local facilities. There should also be stringent conditions on lorry routes for the development. There should be no access through Huntington or New Earswick residential roads. This should be reinforced to all subcontractors who are often the ones who do not comply. The biodiversity of our area should also be protected and ultimately enhanced by the development, again with conditions. We'd expect the houses to be built to the highest possible sustainable levels, which over a 10-year build should become even more effective. Thank you, Chair. Finally, the agreement for the affordable homes should be as tight as possible. Too many times we've found that house builders reduce these numbers after an application has been approved. As there are no insurmountable reasons to go against this proposal, following its inclusion in the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, we don't object to the principle of development as long as the strong conditions are applied, which we've detailed. We would hope that Redrow would continue the spirit of their consultation by involving local people throughout the period of development. We'd be keen to work with them to achieve the best outcomes for our residents.
Thank you. Do any members have questions for Councillor Orwell? Nope. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Orwell. Okay, moving on now. Any further questions for officers, please? Councillor de Gore.
On page 15, it's a highways one again. I note that paragraph 1.10 refers to 2 metres and 3 metre wide shared pedestrian cycleway. Can we have that updated in line with LTM 120? I accept that that may well have been negotiated prior to that guidance, but can we have that updated in line with LTM 120 in our representations?
This is not what the developers are proposing. They're proposing 3 metres and then 2 metres to Huntington. We have argued that this is not adequate, but this is one of those matters that we are trying to resolve, but would argue at appeal if we can't resolve it.
So we know that is our position. Thank you.
Any further questions? In that case, we'll move into debate. And remember, we are making a decision not to approve or refuse this application, but to endorse the recommendation to our officers. Councillor Looker. Sorry. Yeah.
I was looking round to see who you were calling. Personally, I can't see why we shouldn't endorse the recommendations. Thank you very much. I'll move that.
Councillor Barker.
I'm quite happy to second Councillor Looker's opinion.
Okay, are there any of the members who would like to speak? Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to support the recommendation that's been proposed. Just with the, I'd like to make an explicit request that officers have mentioned that continue to be in dialogue with the developers in relation to the proposed North Lane access. I really would wish to note our opposition to what is currently being suggested in terms of a route onto and then through the estate, with the accompanying concerns about rat running and the suitability of North Lane as an access point. So with that caveat, I'd be happy to support the recommendation.
Councillor de Gore.
I'm happy to second that proposal, and I would want to add in that we should strongly advocate the current guidance since gear change June 2020 in relation to sustainable travel. This is a big site, so it's really important that the opportunity is taken to provide compliant provision for walking and cycling to encourage sustainable travel both within the site and to neighbouring areas. So I'd ask for that to be a condition, or whatever you want to call it, as part of our position. Thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I still think we ought, as a committee, to be asking for changes to the Section 106 planning obligations and the gypsy pitches, because if we can't provide 3 pitches on site on a development like this, when are we ever going to provide them on site?
Well, that's a matter that officers can take up.
Well, yeah, but if we recommend this as it's written today, then we're recommending these planning obligations and the draft Section 106, which states that it be a commuted sum of 450,000.
That's what it is.
So that's what I'm asking, that we change the wording of that.
So what you want to do, change it to that the money should be spent on site provision.
3 pitches on site. There's a large enough area of open space to provide them.
I don't think at this moment in time that's something the inspector will look at that as part. We know that this has been looked at by inspectors on other sites where we've had. That will be discussed as part of the appeal process.
Right. Well, why are we then saying that we're happy with the commuted sum? Shouldn't we be saying in this agreement that it's subject to discussion between the council and the applicant? Similar to the shop business.
But we have got to an agreement where they've agreed to pay the sum and we're happy with the agreement as officers. I think if that's entirely a reasonable point for us to get to, and then it will be discussed as part of the appeal process.
Well, can I ask then, have they refused to provide them on site, or have you just simply said, well, we'll take the money and look for an alternative site? How have we arrived at this situation?
Because the local plan policy allows us to get to this point.
Yeah, the relevant policy for the strategic sites and gypsies and travellers, the way it's written, it gives the developers an option to make an off-site contribution. So they're essentially complying with the relevant policy by offering it to go off-site.
But surely the option is there for the council to insist on it being provided on-site, because that's there.
We can only insist that they comply with the policy, and that's what they're doing.
So in other words then, every development that comes up will never provide it on-site. Chair,
I don't think this is an appropriate amendment at all. I think if we are, I would not agree. I'm greatly in favour of providing proper travellers' sites, but we don't pepper pot them just anywhere you think you've got a small green space. If it's going to be done, it's done properly with the appropriate facilities and in conjunction with the travellers and gypsy and various groups consultation. We do not say we'll have 2 here, 3 there, 1 here. It is not appropriate. I would rule this out, Chair, and I think we've had it moved and seconded. I do not accept Councillor Waters' proposal, and if anybody wants to second it, then we can vote on it.
Is anyone prepared to second Councillor Waters' proposal? No, sorry, I'm just asking a very simple question. Is anyone prepared to second Councillor Waters' proposal? It's not. Is yours supplementary to?
Yes, supplementary question, and I'm aware this is potentially an ambiguity in our submitted local plan, but I would assume if we don't have identified sites, the intention is that we should be approaching each large development to seek to negotiate a suitable location within either within that site or somewhere as part of that development. So the question really is, if we've got commitment to contribution to off-site development, what is the strategy in terms of delivering those off-site developments?
Chair, we are not here to discuss traveller sites. I'm sorry, Councillor de Gaunt. I think you are out of order.
So I'm asking a question that relates
You
to
are
the
asking a
conditions that
question,
we've
but
got
we're
here.
going off into a ramification that is not, I think, appropriate to the
I think
discussion
we've
we're
dealt
in.
with that matter now, I think. So consequently, that's a matter for further planning policy as to how we actually deal with the actual provision of travel.
I think the public of York are entitled to know what is the strategy for delivering ships in traveller sites. If we don't have any sites allocated, where's it going to go? If you take this money from them, where are you going to provide it?
But I think we need to concentrate on this
On the planning
application that we're looking
yeah,
at
that's
here,
why
and we've got the, yeah.
I've got Councillor Melly, who was, and then Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies, this is a question for officers instead of a point of debate, but I'm just wondering what the possible outcomes of the kind of appeal inquiry, whatever you want to call it, are. So if the inspector agrees with our arguments of why it hasn't been determined, yeah, if the inspector doesn't agree, what would the outcome be? Would there be a ruling that the application has to be determined within a certain time frame?
No, because it's no longer within our remit to determine it. They will look at it. There's going to be a public inquiry into it in January, where we'll give evidence, the applicant will give evidence, and it'll all be debated. The inspector will then make a recommendation, either the appeals dismissed or allowed. So if it's dismissed, it means the development won't come forward. If it's allowed, they will then look at securing conditions, the 106, all of that will be discussed at the inquiry beforehand.
So if the Section 106 agreement is going to be looked at the inquiry, then
Yes.
surely we as a committee need to decide exactly what Section 106 agreement is going to be considered by the inspector at the inquiry.
That's all in the report.
It's in the report.
Yeah,
Everything.
so I agree with Councillor Waters that if it's possible that traveller pictures should be provided on site, I accept that the policy is that they can be provided off site and that the policy is being met. But is there scope to work with the developer to try and provide it on site if possible?
Potentially, but there is we've already agreed that the contribution is sufficient and the contribution complies with the policy. So there's no reason for us to deviate away from that. It's the same as anything, and this, like the education, we've agreed the contribution, and that's already been secured, and where it complies with policy. That's where we've got to with the Gypsy and Travellers, the same way we have with all the other contributions. We've negotiated it up to this point.
Councillor Eyre, thank you.
I was going to be comment to what Councillor Lucker said and say I agree with Janet, but I think just going to more to that, I think if you start to dig into that travel site provision, then you risk losing more than Section 106. Ultimately, the planning inspector will decide it, and we could end up with less. So having an agreement for something that we find reasonable is probably better than the planning inspector coming and say, well, actually, we think £250,000 is more appropriate. So I think having them agreed to something we agree to, that they then won't challenge when it comes to planning inspector is more useful. In terms of how we do it as a city, I think the point is the same as with the housing allocations. We take a strategic approach and we work with the traveller community to actually find places where they want to have sites and where they want to live and work with them. And that's what we've tried to do over numerous years. That hasn't been possible up until now. That doesn't mean it will never be possible. And one thing that will really assist in that process is, for example, having £450,000 and building a steady reserve of contributions that would then allow us to identify land and purchase land to provide these sites on. The piecemeal approach of trying to, as Councillor Lucker says, drop one or two here and there has never been what the community has wanted. They've wanted more dedicated sites and we've been unable to find that and haven't had the finances to provide it. So I think actually having these off-site contributions is useful. Each one on their own doesn't solve the problem, but cumulatively, as that reserve builds, we reach a point where we can actually deliver something that the community wants.
Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you, Chair. Notwithstanding, I'll get slightly sidetracked in my opinion on that. If this planning hearing is going to determine the Section 106 agreements, could I ask that paragraph 5.21, which is referencing the shop, the provisions, the amenity provisions, play a very large part of your discussions, and I do think that it ought to be flagged up that that is the view of this committee, that there ought to be adequate shops and other amenities on this estate. Because I would certainly be unhappy approving it without that.
Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back to the Gypsy Traveller Roma community that we were talking about, really, I just feel it is very important that we don't make assumptions about what they might want or may not want. So it really is clear going forward that they are part of the conversation and that they are listened to, and that what their needs are considered. Because I can see both points of view here. I can understand that they may well choose to all want to be together in one place. But secondly, that isn't necessarily the right approach. We know that to any other kind of community, it is better to have people in different areas. So we can't be sure what they want. So I'm glad this has been brought up actually by Councillor Waters, because I think it's an important point. And I do think that the community need to be considered as we go forward.
Thank you. Are there any other further member contributions? Because it has been proposed and seconded. I personally, the only issue I have with this is the access onto North Lane, which I think would be better deleted. Other than that, I can't see an issue with this. So if members are ready, I think we can put this to the vote. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please show. That's 13 in favour. Those against? Councillor Hollier, and any abstentions? That is therefore the officer's recommendation is carried. Yeah. Now we've been going for 1 hour 20 minutes. Would you like a short break? Yep, I thought that would be okay. So we'll take 10 minutes if you can get back by sort of 6 o'clock, please. Thank you very much. Right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Move on now to item 4B, which is the outline application with all matters reserved except access for 300 residential dwellings at Huntington South Moor. You'd like to introduce the application?
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder to member, this is exactly the same as the last application. This isn't for a decision, it's to look at the officer's recommendation, which is contained within your report, because we are looking at a non-determination appeal. So the application is for an outline planning permission with all matters reserved except access. Again, the same as the previous one for circa 300 residential dwellings. So this is the site location plan as submitted. You can see the red line. I'll just outline it there with my pointer for you. And you can see the existing residential properties to this side. And again, the stadium here. The next plan gives a wider context. So you can see Jockey Lane, sorry, I couldn't quite read that then. Here, New Lane, and the stadium development here, and the park and ride to the just here. Again, the same as the previous one, an indicative master plan of where the houses could go. And again, building areas and heights, given that it's indicative, but the yellow area is development up to 2 stories, and then the blue area would be 2 stories with the opportunity for 2.5 to 3 story properties at key locations. That shows the tree constraints, within the site there. I'll go back to this plan, so I think that's the best one. In terms of additional information, we've had 2 letters of support received since the agenda was published, and that is contained within your additional information. That's it from me. Thank you, Chair.
Okie doke. Do members have any questions for our officers? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I was just intrigued with the mention of the historical status of this site within the green belt. I just wonder if officers would confirm that it's had rather a checkered history, in that it's been what I described at the local plan hearing as green belt okey-cokey, in that it was in the development plan under Labour, out under the Lib Dems, and it's now out of the development, classed as greenbelt for some bizarre reason. And as far as historical status goes, I can remember back 20 years when this was held up as an alternative site to the land west of Metcalfe Lane. And at the time, the Lib Dems were saying, oh, it was a vital part of the greenbelt. But now, as we look at it, it's urban fringe, developed on 3 sides now. So I just wonder whether, in the light of the comments by Mr. Beacon earlier, has there been an up-to-date sustainability appraisal being done of this site in terms of its, to me, excellent transport links into the city, the compromised green belt and the compromised ecology of the site now?
I'm just going to ask Alison to come in about I think there's been a recent Greenbelt topic paper that Alison has the detail. Alison, are you there? Cook.
Yes, I'm here, Becky.
Want to introduce yourself, and if you can just answer that for me, Alison, that'd be brilliant.
Of course. So I'm Alison Cook. I'm the head of strategic planning policy. There has been, sort of in answer to Councillor Waters' question, the site historically in the 2005 local plan was greenbelt. It's now proposed to be in the emerging local plan to be greenbelt. There was a time when we were looking at proposed allocations in the local plan, and we've been through various portfolio of different sites through the course of preparation, at which point this site was considered at one of those versions. However, that has not been taken through the process. The local plan process is fully supported by a sustainability appraisal of the entire plan, and also taking consideration of any reasonable alternatives that have been identified. And this will form part of the debate at local plan examination when we're looking at sites.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre, and then Councillor Melody.
Yeah, just to follow up on that one, to the comment to Hokey Cokey, am I correct in thinking this has always been in the green belt? It's never been in or out of the green belt. It has always been in the green belt. For a period of around about 18 months, there was a suggestion to remove it, but that didn't go forward. So the site has always been in the green belt and has always been developed on 3 sides for about 30 to 40 years, maybe less. You know that one.
It was developed on during the Southern Rydale period up to about 1996. So yes, it's about 25 years it's been developed. Thank you.
Do you want Alison to come in?
She could answer it.
Yeah, Alison, can you do that?
Yes, my understanding is that this is remains to be a greenfield site that has been in the greenbelt for a significant period of time or considered within the greenbelt. It's certainly within the general extent of the greenbelt as outlined by the regional spatial strategy, as it forms with a site within the 6 miles. And in our emerging plan, like I say, the detailed boundaries that we've looked at through the Greenbelt topic paper evidence why we consider this an important parcel for the Greenbelt and sets that out in detail.
Thank you. Councillor Melly was the next person to put hand up, and then Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. So this planning application hasn't been determined, so the applicant is appealing against the non-determination. We're being asked to endorse the council's approach at that appeal, but the approach we're being asked to endorse is all the reasons for refusal. So I'm just wondering why that strategy, because basically to me it seems like the approach is to explain all the ways that it could be determined as refused.
Yeah, because this one's different to the site before, and that's why we've given you reasons why we would, if we had made the decision, we would have given the reasons for refusal as follows. So that's why they're in there.
So the applicant is saying it's unreasonable that you haven't determined this, and we're saying, yeah, we could determine it. You're right. We have got grounds to determine it.
We haven't determined it. This one hasn't been. This was only submitted this year, not that long ago. In all fairness, in terms of timescales. There were still technical issues to resolve. There's still highways issues again outstanding on this one. So we were still in the process of that. However, the applicant has decided to appeal non-determination. And that's hence why if we had got to a position where we'd been able to bring this to members, we would have recommended refusal. Hence why we've given the information that we have in the report. That's the difference.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you for explaining that. So I know that legally there isn't a kind of prescribed time frame for when a determination has to be made, unlike licensing where it kind of gives a specific time scale. The phrasing is something like it has to be done in a reasonable time scale, doesn't it? So is there what is usually considered a reasonable time scale, and when this sort of thing has gone to appeal in the past, is the time scale that we're currently in since the application was submitted usually considered reasonable?
So we had an agreed decision date with the developer, which passed in July, and once that date had passed, they're entitled to make the appeal against non-determination if they wish.
We usually negotiate extensions of times, and when we negotiate an extension of time, it's not possible to appeal non-determination. We weren't able to get to a point where we could get another extension of time, hence the appeal for non-determination.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to comments about it being developed for the last 20, 25 years on 3 sides, I don't think it's ever been developed to the sheer scale that it has in recent years, which has thoroughly compromised its alleged greenbelt value. Greenbelt value that was very contentiously argued about at Greenbelt working group meetings 15, 16, 17 years ago. And in terms of the comment I made about Greenbelt okie cokey, I would have probably been better saying development plan okie cokey, because it was in, out, in, out.
Right.
I just needed to clarify that. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, Councillor Douglas. Oh, no, you don't wish to speak. Okay, fine. Any other questions for officers? Nope, in that case, we can move into public participation. And we have, on this one, we have 3 public participants. The first one being David Joblin, who's objecting to the application in direct conflict with the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan. If you could just introduce yourself, Mr. Joblin. And... Sorry? You have 3 minutes.
Right. Right, just to let you know, I'm Dave Joblin. I'm Vice Chair of Huntington Parish Council, and I was also the lead coordinator for the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan. In 2014, in September, Huntington Parish Council decided that they really needed a neighbourhood plan to have some sort of control on seeing what was going to be built in Huntington. By 2015, we brought together a team of 7 people, 2 from the general population and the rest from the parish council itself. What we've tried to do to find out exactly what the residents wanted rather than our neighbourhood plan is to get a consensus from the residents what they wanted us to do. So we distributed 4,400 questionnaires. Parish councils delivered them on ourselves. When we got the answers back from the questionnaire and from SurveyMonkey, we put together what we thought the public wanted us as the principles and core values that we needed to put in our neighbourhood plan. Once we'd actually made a draft neighbourhood plan, we had 2 consultation events in 2 separate community centres in different areas in Huntington, because it's quite stretched out, if you know it. The 3 main core principles, because there was 11 altogether that we chose, was support the provision of housing that meets the need of Huntington, the mix of the housing, and where it was going to fit. We had to support local strategies to increase and improve the infrastructure and to keep as much of the greenfields sites as possible. We looked at 4 different sites that we thought Joe Public wanted us to have and we wanted. There was 2 sites round about New Lane. There was 1 site which was on the north side of the Ring Road, down an ST8, which was the other site you were discussing earlier on. Overwhelmingly, ST8 was approved by ourselves. But, right, yeah, no problem. So we eventually submitted our draft to the City of York Council, and then that went to consultation. We had the referendum in August 2021. That was approved by a majority of 87%. Now I understand our neighbourhood plan is made now, and it has some legal standing. Really hope that you reject this application, particularly in view that our neighbourhood plan has rejected it ourselves. Thank you. Good. Thank you.
Thank you for your contributions. We'll take your views into account. Our second speaker tonight is Ms. Gwen Swinburne, who is speaking in support of the application.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think you should spend a penny contesting this appeal. I strongly support this application, which is just the perfect site for homes with so many local amenities, shops, restaurants, leisure, park and ride, cycle and walking access to the city, a perfectly sustainable site. The land isn't good quality, nor is it attractive in any way. Utility, highways and other infrastructure comments all appear to be non-problematic. Schools can be expanded, affordable homes are needed, not just flats in the city in the inner wards. This is especially true as this current administration is very welcoming of both refugees and immigrants. We have to provide homes for all our new arrivals. The committee only a couple of weeks ago was quite content to breach its own greenbelt policy by approving a major housing development off a very narrow road with problematic junction in Dunnington with 0 facilities. So it came as a surprise to me that this report was not supportive of this great site, far more suitable site with every amenity to hand. Whilst we keep hearing from some that no houses should be built in the green belt, it seems what is meant is no houses must be built in some parts of the green belt inside the inner circular road. I perfectly understand why locals in this Lib Dem ward wouldn't want such a development, even with 30% affordable, but in so vociferously supporting the city as a sanctuary city, as a sanctuary council, when we have at best a 3-year housing supply, something just has to give. The Lib Dem ward should be leading by example. Regarding section 106 and related obligations, may I express my concern that there are no 4 or 5 bedroomed houses. We have 11,000 Afghan refugees in hotels, many with very large families. We cannot be blind to the fact that these very welcome refugees will need larger homes now and moving forward. We are not providing them. Also, I see little to support GP provision. And finally, may I express my concern that once again, the private golf club is on the list of recipients of Section 106 monies. Surely we should be ensuring that more open access sports, less elite sports and leisure is supported and provided locally, not a 20-minute bus ride away. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Have we got questions, Councillor?
2 quick questions, Chair.
I'm not a planning person, you know it.
Well, the simple one was the first one. You said that Lib Dem should be leading the way in terms of housing development. Did you hear the ward councillor for Huntington speak in support of the 970 homes in his ward? Would you say that was leading the way?
I would say it was leading the way, but only partially because this is a much more sustainable site. So meet your goals far more easily.
And the second question regarding the golf club, are you aware that the golf club is open to anybody to use? It's not a member-only club. Anybody can pay to play as they can at any other sporting facility in the city?
I'm sure they can, but getting the golf clubs and everything, it is an elite sport. And there's so many other things that you could spend the money on. I just think we should be careful about that.
Cricket bats are more expensive.
Well, yeah, I would also say that.
You can if they are, if you can use them. No, I can't, that's true. Any further questions? Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Swinburne.
Chair, just before I go, thank you for your explanation at the beginning of this meeting. It made it very clear to me and it covered all the concerns I had. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have a third speaker, which is...
Well, I'll just say that it's not coming through these speakers at all. We can hardly hear anything this end. So can you put it through these speakers, please?
We're ready, Chair?
Welcome, Councillor All. Long time no see.
Indeed.
3 minutes.
Yes. Before I start, it's the first time I've been called elite, Chair. So, good afternoon again, everybody, or good evening now. Again, I'm speaking for my ward colleagues, Councillor Runciman and Councillor Coolidge. Many planning applications are very finely balanced with arguments for and against approval. This application is not one of those. It's one of the most straightforward applications we've known. Not only is the land in the green belt, it was not included in the local plan for development, and it was not included in the Huntington neighbourhood plan. As I said previously, this plan was not by any councillors, political party or community group. We would like to thank the hundreds, not thousands, hundreds of residents from across Huntington who've taken the trouble to send in their objections. In case local people are accused of NIMBYism, it's worth remembering that in recent years, there have been 3 housing developments and the Vanguard Shopping Centre and the Stadium Complex, probably the most development, more development than any other ward in the city. And Huntington people voted for their neighbourhood plan, which includes the near 1,000 home development which you've just been discussing. Whilst we congratulated Redrow on their consultation, sadly, we can't do that for Barrett's. It consisted of just one letter, just before Christmas last year, to a limited number of people. The parish council were not included. Having withdrawn a proposal for this land a few years ago, following massive opposition from across Huntington, Barrett's knew this would cause local people considerable anxiety, and at the height of the pandemic and just before Christmas. These same residents had suffered years of development of the Vanguard and Stadium complex. We were advised that the so-called consultation letter was about to be sent, so we wrote to Barrett Chief Executive, urging them to stop the distribution. To no avail, and we know the impact this has had for some people. Huntington is a densely built area with little green space. We do not have the parks of other areas, Hull Road Park, West Bank Park, Rantry Park, etc. It therefore provides a critical purpose of the green belt, as well as being a barrier to further urban sprawl. Some residents have suggested that it becomes a leisure area. In case you're attracted by the proposed affordable housing, it's worth remembering that after Barrett's received permission for the Heathside development at the other end of New Lane, they later cut the numbers of affordable homes. It's therefore a straightforward decision. The proposal is not in the local plan, not in the neighbourhood plan, and should remain part of the green belt.
Thank you, Councillor Earle. Are there any questions from members for Councillor Earle? Nope, you've got all without a flesh wound. Thank you very much indeed. We'll take your views into account. Okay, do members have any further questions for officers arising from what we've heard? No, in that case, sorry, Councillor Collier.
I was starting debate.
Well, I'm now happy to move into debate if that is what you wish. Councillor.
Just really to move the officer's recommendation, Chair. It's clearly inappropriate development in the Greenbelt for which there are no special circumstances. I don't think this really should detain us very, very long. If people would like to see this land developed, the correct way to do it would be to change the Greenbelt designation through the local plan process. It looks to me like a kind of last throw of the dice, smash and grab attempt by the developer. It should be resisted.
Councillor Looker.
It is difficult to find a reason to vote against this because we are not, it is not a vote on endorsing or approving a planning permission. It is merely endorsing the reasons to contest the appeal. And in a sense, I can't see why I should vote against those, but I'm going to abstain because I cannot vote in favour of this. Some of us did try very hard, as Councillor Eyre will testify, to change the proposed green belt. And I think, I mean, in a sense, it just looks ridiculous. Looking at this map, I don't always agree with Ms. Swinburne, but on this occasion, she and I are as one. I cannot see any reason why this is sitting in the green belt when the previous site was not. This site is actually much more conducive to good quality housing. I mean, ideally you have both, because as Ms. Swinburne said, York desperately needs new housing. And I'm sorry, I don't think Councillor Runciman's little application is going to take us very far in meeting the diabolical need that the Councillor Pavlovich has many times recommended. So I'm just going to abstain. I can't find a reason to vote against it, but I cannot support this because it goes against all the things I hold most dear when I come to consider the need for good housing within a reasonable area. As somebody said, it's hugely sustainable. So I'm really disappointed in this one.
Councillor Rapp.
I thought Councillor Cook was going to second Councillor Hollier's proposal, so I'll do it myself in terms of that one. Yeah, I think you're correct when you look at that on a small scale map showing that particular point, that it doesn't seem to show much purpose. But I think the comments Councillor Owl made about the nature of Huntington itself are probably more significant. And if you start to pan that actually out and start to look at Huntington, as someone who attended Huntington School, was taught by Councillor Fisher, unfortunately, for many, many years.
Not much.
When you look at those density streets, there is very, very little green space in that entire area to the west of New Lane. And the Monks Cross development did grow out of that one quite significantly during that period. And this is, in essence, the very last gasp, but in many ways, it's the sort of the concrete over the car park thing. It's the only bit of green space, the only bit of open scope that you actually see. The rest of to the north of New Lane has continued to be developed. There's a massive development happen across there. We're looking at an allocation in the local plan of a further 970 homes. There is a point where there is no green space between Huntington and the ring road itself. And that is why this was identified in the local plan as being of particular significance. The same way that some of those areas around the previous development were maintained that open aspect. So the housing doesn't abut on the one we've just approved all the way up to the existing housing. It remains that green buffer. The same has happened in the previous application at Dunnington, that maintains that green buffer. So there is constant open aspect. With this, there is nothing. The people of Huntington will be staring at an industrial estate. You will have housing, industrial estate, ring road. And that, I don't think, is the historic character and setting of the city. That's what we've attempted to maintain. And that's why I think, as has been said, this one should be robustly defended.
Thank you, Councillor Pavlovich.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Whilst I do have a great deal of sympathy for the submissions that have been made by the public and indeed by the seconder, I would dispute that there is no green space in Huntington. You only have to cross Malton Road, which is literally 100 yards from this estate. And that's, no, it is actually still Huntington now.
Estate people,
it doesn't matter.
We don't have to get a passport to move from Huntington to Heworth.
Anyway, the point I was going to make is that I do feel that there are exceptional circumstances, and I do feel that the exceptional circumstances are the affordable housing and the housing need within the city. So I'm afraid I can't support the officer recommendation, and I will listen to any of the other members' comments before I decide whether to abstain or to actually vote against the recommendation.
Councillor Melly, I think, was next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not convinced by the grounds for refusal on this one. There doesn't seem to be grounds for refusal in terms of design conservation or archaeology or ecology or landscaping or highways or education provision or public protection or flood risk. Almost every single external consultee has come back with no objection, including Highways England, Historic England, Yorkshire Water, the Drainage Board. The main grounds for refusal seems to just be that it's in the green belt. So the assessment we need to make is whether or not the benefits outweigh it being in the green belt. And to me, it seems like development here could make a significant contribution towards housing need in the city, including affordable housing. And as is stated in the report, it's in a sustainable location. So I'm not convinced by the grounds refusal. I'm not sure it would hold up at the inquiry, so I don't feel I can vote for the recommendation.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair, and especially as the continued designation in the green belt was and still is a purely political decision. I, for one, would welcome the inspector's judgment on this when it actually goes to an inquiry. I think what residual green belt value there was on this site has been thoroughly compromised by the developments that have taken place around it. You've probably changed that area now into a thoroughly urban area. How on earth that's going to stand up at an inquiry, I do not know. Because as the speakers have said, or one of the speakers have said, can there be a more sustainable site than this? Now, in the light of the decision that you took last month, with a greenbelt site at Dunniton in a thoroughly unsustainable location, how on earth some of you can try and defend this tonight, I do not know.
Councillor Fenton.
I think that just to go back to the point that the previous speakers haven't mentioned is as Councillor Eyre mentioned, this is the last patch of open land for some distance, and as Councillor Orrell and others have said, there has been a huge amount of development in Huntington, and I don't really buy the argument that, well, everything else has been developed, so you may as well develop that as well. This is one of the last opportunities really for residents to have access to open space, and it would be really encouraging if this were to be brought forward as formalised open space for residents in what exists as Huntington and the soon to be near on 1,000 new homes in Huntington that we've discussed. So I really don't buy the argument that, well, everything else has been built on, so you may as well build on that as well. I don't think that would do any favours to the potential residents of that site or to the existing residents of Huntington. So I would encourage members to support the officer recommendation.
Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a very difficult application. Something that nobody has mentioned is that the neighbourhood plan has been taken through consultation over a number of years, and the local residents have been heavily involved in decisions around that, and this piece of land wasn't adopted within that. So I think that has to be given weight. But I also do agree that this would be a perfect site in many other ways, and it is a great shame to see that opportunity for some additional housing go. And I'd also like to say that as far as I'm aware, and I don't live very far from here, I've never seen any indication that this is going to be turned into general public access land for leisure. I'd like to be corrected if anybody else knows anything different. I don't think you do. I think it's privately owned, and that's how it's going to stay. So people don't use it for anything other than looking at, as far as I'm aware. But I do appreciate that neighbourhood plans have to be considered. And so I feel I'm going to abstain today, which isn't something that I generally do. But I feel it's hard to support the recommendations or to absolutely dismiss them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to say, I have been part of the neighbourhood plan working party, working in Strensall to develop a neighbourhood plan. I and other residents have put in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to develop the neighbourhood plan, and it has not yet been adopted. Huntington has been adopted. It is now part of the development plan for the area. And I think if we ignore that, ignore the conditions in it, I think we are basically saying, well, you've completely wasted your time and money. And that is my concern. I think we have to pay attention to what is in the development plan. The local plan also does not include this site. And I emphasise that the local plan is not adopted yet. It's not been through its final inspection, but it does carry moderate weight. So I think we should pay attention to the conditions in the development plan. I think we have two of the people over here, but I'll take Councillor Doughty first because you haven't spoken.
Thank you, Chair. The land's not included in the draft local plan, which although is not yet adopted, I do think is the most significant aspect here. And it shows the urgency of getting the local plan adopted, because that gives the developers indication of where the city believes homes should be built. This land's not included in the draft, and that'll be the reason, or the main reason why I'll support the officer's recommendation.
Any other speakers? I think there were. Councillor Gwen.
Yes, I just want to say that I think it is a difficult decision, this one, but as you say, the right place for determining this would be part of our local plan if it's been allocated on that basis. So do have to defend the position which has been adopted, although it may have been overtaken during the course of time. So, you know, the right place really to determine that this would be through the local plan. Having said that, I do acknowledge the points that have been made about we do need housing, and this on the face of it would be a very sustainable location close to amenities. And but I do also take on board the point about public open space, as I understand it from this application proposes including public open space, which at the moment it's an agricultural field. It's not available for general public amenity. So, you know, it's a finely balanced position, really.
Councillor
Just to come back at a couple of points, Chair. I think Councillor Ward's comments were not questioning the Greenbelt designation. It's Greenbelt. Your comments seem to say that it wasn't Greenbelt. The reality is it is Greenbelt, and the planning inspector will say it's Greenbelt. So your comments that it aren't Greenbelt are not actually relevant and are incorrect. In terms of the leisure use, I fully agree with what Councillor Douglas said. I've never seen that particular piece of land itself being used. However, that was one of my favourite routes during lockdown, and I did take the walk along Monk Stray, which is in my ward, up New Lane and down the pathway through to the new stadium, which runs past the cemetery. And that is actually a nice semi-rural walk. And for those people that live on Anthea Drive, Highthorne, Butfield, for example, the only bit of open space they can do, they can actually walk down New Lane alongside that pleasant agricultural land, along that footpath down to the wonderful new stadium, I must say, fantastic facilities everybody should enjoy. You can then follow that particular piece of land around, coming back onto the slightly less scenic Jockey Lane. I must admit that bit of the walk is a bit of a shame across the range and everything, but that is a semi-rural walk that you can still manage from those particular areas. Otherwise, if you were to take the Monk Stray thing, you're looking at about a mile walk probably to get to Monk Stray itself, and then for the walk around Monk Stray. So for a lot of people, that is too far to walk to get that semi-rural. If you fill this in, then there will be no option in terms of that semi-rural walk for any of those residents of Huntington. They would have to probably, as you mentioned previously, get in their cars and drive to the new country park up at North Monk, causing a parking problem on that link road and having to have a walk on that one, which is not particularly sustainable in itself.
Councillor Waters again.
Thank you, Chair. I must respond to that. I think we all appreciate that it's still Greenbelt. It's all been Greenbelt since the RSS was revoked because of the policies that were retained to protect York's Greenbelt. And it's up to the ruling administration to decide which bits they want to take out in the local plan. Now, the point with New Lane Huntington always has been its retention by certain political groups for political reasons rather than sensible development reasons. Again, how many people around this table have actually said what a sustainable site it actually is?
Yeah, I think those people have had a say now. So we have it proposed and seconded the recommendations. The committee endorsed the reasons to contest the appeal that they presented to the planning inspector as part of the council's statements of case, and delegated authority given to the chief planner having regard to the heads of terms of the report to complete a document containing obligations pursuant to section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act, as amended in order to meet the requirement of the planning inspector. So that is what we are voting on. Okay, all those in favour of the officers approving the recommendation of officers? is eight, I think. 8 in favour, and those against? These are 5 against, and any abstentions? 2 abstentions. So that recommendation is carried. Thank you very much indeed. Now, would members like another break, or are you ready to go straight into the? You need a 5-minute break to get the new speakers in there. That's right, because some of them are coming in. So if we say 18:50, that's 7 minutes. Yes. We now move on to item 4C, which is one of two applications at the former gas works at Heworth Green. This one is a reserved matters application for appearance and landscaping for Zone A, 119 dwellings, commercial community use unit. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a reserved matters application for Zone A, and it's for 119 dwellings with a commercial community use unit. So this is proposed site plan, Zone A. I'll go around it with my pen so you can see that that is Zone A. We're coming to look at the other zone, Zone C, as your next application, but I'm not going to talk through that at the moment. So this is your proposed north and east elevations. You can see there. I'll leave that on just for a second for you to have a look at. And then proposed south and west elevations there. And then you've got the proposed floor level, so you can see the L-shaped building, I-shaped building, would you say I? There. And then with the car parking arrangement there. And again, this goes through the floor plans for each of the floors. You can see the slight changes as it goes through the levels. And again, so these are the proposed section plans. Again, you can see the heights and how the height has been reduced towards the top levels to sit away from the front elevations. And again, that's the general landscape arrangement and the cycle storage within Zone A. So this here is a visualization. As I say, every time I show you a visualization, it's a visualization, rely on the elevations rather than these. These are just as an aid memoir for you more than anything else. So that's block A, as you can see there. And block A, a further visualization there. I will go back to the site plan. And then there is the additional information. 2 seconds. I will just. So there is updates to conditions that are shown on your additional information and the deletion of condition 8 with regard to the travel plan, but an informative would be added instead. That's because condition 8 is covered as part of the outline, application. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, have we got questions? Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. It's just regards the comments from Councillor Webb in terms of the change of the community space into a commercial development. Is there anything that can be done about that at this stage, or have we set that at the outline stage?
It was established at outline, which gives flexibility as to what that space can be used as. So it's always been the case, and the outline permission allows it to be either a community use or something that's more commercial orientated. So that's been and gone with the outline now.
So that was a long-winded no. There's nothing we can do about it.
No.
Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. At the site visit, the question was raised about the colour of the brick, and I think the officers mentioned that would be subject to further discussion and I can't remember whether it was condition or informative. Are we any clearer, and maybe something the applicants can pick up when they speak, any clearer on the final proposed colour and texture of the brickwork?
The applicants will be able to explain as well. That was one of the primary reasons why we brought the visuals along and added them to the presentation to show you the intent. With this block, and this zone, it's always been the intention. It's a sort of a dark reddish, maybe slightly brownish. So 2 different tones of brick, as shown in the visualizations. It's the next zone that we'll come on to, where we wanted to have more dialogue and seek to agree a brick that's less buff in colour and more reddish tones. And the applicants have acknowledged that they're moving in that direction, and they are looking at bricks that have subtle tones of red in there. But there's conditions essentially to agree that the final brick colour mix.
Supplementaries on that, Councillor Pavlovich.
Thanks, Chair. In paragraph 3.6, it mentions a 2 metre wide path has been provided between Minster View Street and Eberarkham Way. In 5.10, it says it's a 3 metre wide path connecting into Eberarkham Way. Are these 2 different paths, or are they the same path with just 2 different measurements on it?
They are, yes, the 2 different paths. So at the top of this drawing, the path that runs parallel to Heworth Green, that's the 3 metre wide one. And the one further down between zone A and zone B, this is the other one that we've introduced. That's the narrower one that will connect into Eberarkham Way through the site, and that's the street where we have the view of the Minster in.
Thank you.
Councillor Devon.
Supplementary to that, am I right in thinking that is intended for both cycle and pedestrian, or is it just a pedestrian path or what?
The intention is the one parallel to Heworth Green is an option for cyclists as well as pedestrians. So if you're within the site, you can get to that junction without going out onto the busier road.
But the middle one.
Chair, sorry, we can't hear when it's a private conversation between
my
2
microphone
people.
went off. Sorry, apologies for that. So I was just wanting to clarify if the second one which you referred to, is that wide enough to comply with LTN 120?
I think the point with that one is it connects into that footpath that's already runs parallel to the new link road. So it's intended to be the same width as that. I presume if you had a bike, you would be able to use it, but the main route for cyclists has been planned as that one parallel to Heworth Green.
Have any of the members got questions? No, in that case, we can move on to public participation. We've only one speaker on this. It's Tim Ross, who is the agent for the applicant in support. And I gather you have some colleagues to answer questions online. Is that correct?
Somebody else.
Oh, some are here. Right, so it's 2 in person and Stephen Clues, architect, Mike Phillips and Mark Shilton online. Good. Okay, we've got 3 minutes if you'd like to take it away, and then we'll ask some questions.
Thank you, Chair. This application is another key part of bringing forward the development of the former gasworks for much needed housing, offering a unique opportunity to clean up this contaminated brownfield site, which has lain vacant for over a decade. In March 2020, the Council's Planning Committee granted outline planning consent, which approved the height, scale and layout for up to 607 new homes. Since then, there's been considerable progress on site to remediate the land and remove the gas holder and other unsightly gas infrastructure and replace it with new pipes and kit under the ground. The new Sustrans ramp link and the relocation of the phone mast now both have planning permission too. The application before members is seeking approval for reserved matters relating to appearance of the proposed buildings and the landscaping only for Zone A. And Zone A and C, which together provide 250 new homes. If approved, it is anticipated that construction work will commence as soon as possible, which will make an important contribution to the council's housing delivery targets. Regarding the appearance of and the landscaping of Zone A, the design before members as a result of more than 2 years dialogue with officers as well as public consultation events. The council's planners, city architect and landscape architect have all written in support of the proposal. The key merits of Zone A proposal include high quality architecture, incorporating a townhouse typology that is contemporary and sensitive to the conservation area. The creation of a pedestrian and cycle friendly high quality environment. A human scale is achieved. For example, there are front doors into ground floor apartments and front gardens, and the main entrance to upper floors are situated on the main elevations. Planting improved pedestrian routes and front doors along Ever Arkham Way, which is currently a very hostile environment. Arrival Street is proposed as a green tree-lined street with private terraces overlooking the street. The proposal for Minster View is for a secondary residential street terminating in a pocket park with seating in view of York Minster, and the retention and protection of mature trees along Heworth Green. There's excellent private and shared amenity spaces proposed, including communal landscape park, podium, inset and sculptural projecting balconies and terraces. Inclusive design measures are incorporated, including accessible dwellings and landscaping. There's choice and good quality accommodation is provided, including duplex and dual aspect apartments. Electrical vehicle charging and cycle parking is provided in accordance with the council's requirements. The officer's recommendation is to approve the remaining reserved matters in relation to appearance and landscaping, and I hope members can support the proposal too. Thank you for listening. I've got Stephen Clues, the architect, alongside me. Mike Phillips, the project manager, is behind us, and we've got Mark Shilton, who's the landscape architect, who's on the line. So we'll all do our best to answer any questions from members.
Thank you very much. Claire, sorry, Councillor Douglas, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a few questions. We saw in the visualisation there that the brick is a red-brown colour. Can you confirm that that is what it will stay as on Block A?
There's a condition proposed in the officer report which requires samples of the materials to be provided on site for approval by the planning officer. I can let Stephen, the architect, just describe what bricks he's been looking at.
Yeah, so we've obviously undertaken a number of site visits to the area. Heworth Green conservation area is predominantly sort of red brick. So we've chosen those two separate red bricks. It's complementary brick colours to each other in conversation with the city architect. That will be our intention moving forward. The two different bricks are chosen. So we have the ground floor lighter red brick, and above is a sort of darker, more brown flint coloured, sort of more urban brick. Where we have duplex apartments, that lower lighter brickwork kicks up to 2 stories, just to sort of give an idea of the function of the apartments behind. So it's just been a progressive selection over that time with the city architect.
And there has been comment that local residents are concerned that there's quite a lot of tarmac in the area. Have you looked at that? Can you tell me what the road surface is going to be like within the development, whether that's accurate or not?
Yes, so if you look at that plan there, the only area of tarmac there is within the Undercroft car park. The other areas will be, so the footpaths around the edge will be resin brown gravel. The arrival street, which is just to the left of the red line, which is where you're coming off Heworth Green, that will be a mix of Dutch pavers. The main bit of tarmac, I suppose, is the car park serving Zone C. But other than that, there's very little tarmac, in that landscape plan.
And have you considered using environmentally friendly versions of tarmac rather than the standard?
In terms of it being more permeable?
Yeah.
Well, this is
And
subject.
environmentally friendly.
I mean, this is subject to obviously contracts with the constructor, but in terms of drainage, it's part of an overall drainage strategy, and there's actually attenuation tanks. They'll all be positively drained into the attenuation, so you won't have surface drainage, and that attenuation tank is in Zone C and Zone A. So under that, the car park is a big tank, so that will positively drain it, and that will stop any surface water impacts. Okay,
can I ask you to consider environmentally friendly versions of tarmac in order to consider the environmental impact? I think we know that it's really quite high. And then finally, commercial space versus community. I know that in previous applications we were told that there was flexibility around the use of that, and the local residents around the area really, and I'm sure the residents of this development would really like to see a social use for that community space. Have you made any further progress on those discussions yet?
Yeah, so the developer continues to work with Social Vision, which spoke at the outline application. So the intention is they've been looking at alternatives to give them an even more prominent location on the site for a facility. If that's not available and they can't find a more prominent location, then I think the intention is that the fallback would be it's the flexible commercial space in Zone A that they would end up occupying.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of questions on the provision for sustainable transport. Note on paragraph 3.5 for the cycle storage. I assume this is being negotiated with officers about self-closing, locking doors from a security point of view. I can understand, but I'm just concerned, will you take into account the needs of disabled users who may need a powered door rather than something that requires physical strength to pull it open? Is that something you can look at?
Yeah, of course, we would take that into consideration as part of the design, yes.
Okay. And the other point, which relates to a question I asked earlier about the access route in particular, one across well, it's the join between those two zones, isn't it, between A and B? I assume that connects through to the rest of the footpath network within the whole site. So can you take that into account? I mean, at the moment, the agreement is a 2 metre wide path, but could you actually look at the potential for that being wider if it's going to be used by like a significant number of people for the whole site? I think 2 metres could be an issue. Maybe I'm not understanding the full.
Better. So essentially cycles, there's access roads that run around Zone B primarily and next to the proposed neighbourhood green. Mm-hmm. So they would be used by cyclists primarily. And then there's the one parallel to Heworth Green, which Jonathan explained was 3 metres wide. So it's anticipated that in terms of linking into cycle routes around the area, cyclists would come in through Heworth Green and then they can go through the centre of the site. There's a link down to the Sustrans route there, which is proposed. Yeah. And similarly, they would cycle round Zone B and they'd come out onto Layerthorpe.
Okay, so there is an access through to the south. It's not the only exit route.
And actually, even the road, even the route between Zone A and Zone B, which is where the red dot is, that is partially a vehicular route anyway, because obviously cars have to get to the car park. Right. So cycles would use that as well in reality.
Thank you.
I wonder if you just repeat again your answer to Councillor Douglas about tarmac. I'm not sure I quite got that. Did you say you are going to consider alternatives, or what exactly did you say in answer to that question? Do you mind repeating that, please?
I suppose my question was regarding if there's a concern about permeability and that being unsustainable because it's tarmac, then there's a site-wide drainage strategy, which means surface water is dealt with in a sustainable way by virtue of attenuation tanks being situated beneath both car parks. So that means surface water is controlled through the attenuation tanks. With regards to the sustainability of the material of car park, I mean, it's a detail that we probably haven't got to at this stage. I guess there'll be conditions around the approval of the actual technical detail of the surfaces, but we haven't gone out to appoint contractors on those materials as yet.
Thank you for clarifying those points. Are there any further questions from members to officers arising from that? Councillor Hollier.
Thanks, Chair. I think if I understood correctly, then the intention is to have the community space in a more visible space elsewhere within the site. And then if that's not possible, to use the space in Zone A, would it be reasonable to put a condition, or is it too late to put a condition on that space is sort of safeguarded until alternate space is found elsewhere in the site? Or
I'm not sure that we could do that, given that there's still. I'm not sure that it would be reasonable to do that, given that we've got another reserve matters to consider next, and then another reserve matter still to come. So it could still be brought forward, just in later stages of the development.
but could you condition it that if it didn't come forward, then this site was sort of safeguarded for that use, unless it was provided elsewhere, in which case we could revert to the commercial use, or rely, I guess, on that, on a sort of slight goodwill, I guess.
What we've got is an outline permission that requires 130 square metres in this zone that we're looking at to be a commercial type space, and the permission allows that to be used as retail or community use. There's another condition that relates to Zone B, and that requires a kind of, it's not a commercial use as such, but it requires some of that space to provide communal facilities, but for the residents. But that's the only detail that we have in my mind. That's all tied up in the outline consent. We can't revisit the uses at reserve matters stage.
Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask what the policy is on the percentage of disabled parking spaces that should be on a site?
Don't know what that is off the top of my head, and Helen's gone, so I can't answer that, I'm afraid, sorry.
Okay. The population is 10% people have disabilities. So the number of disabled spaces on Zone A is only 4 out of 45. It doesn't quite reach the 10%, but I notice on Zone C, which we'll come on to, it's less than that. So I'm just concerned that across the site, because we're looking at them in isolation, that we won't necessarily have those, you know, the full quota of disabled parking spaces.
We'll look that up for you.
Well, in the 2005 local plan, we used to have maximum car parking standards that type of policy or guidance isn't in the 2018 plan. So there's no car parking standards in the local plan for development. And it's also silent on what percentage of any car parking may need to be disabled as well.
Councillor.
I'm just going to further complicate that because as I'm looking at that through now, should that be, so 10% of the standard spaces are disabled, but then you've got the complication that you have 4 electric and 2 visitors, so you then need 10% of those disabled as well. So it's slightly more complicated than just saying 10% of the total. I'm not sure what the answer to that one is, Councillor Douglas, but you need sort of 10%, because some visitors parking should be disabled, and 10% of the EV points should also be disabled, and that would give you 10% across the whole. Otherwise, you end up with 10% of the general and no EV and no visitor parking. I realise that's neither the question nor a solution.
Well, on this particular site, they're marked out the ones that are the disabled ones, and they're sort of within the private residence parking area as opposed to being on the street. So there's no.
And highways colleagues haven't objected to then they would look at the split of car parking.
We're coming back on that, Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, sorry, I just wonder if we haven't got a policy around this, then I wonder if it has been fully considered, and I think that really needs to be checked that it has, because obviously the numbers at the moment don't fully reach 10% of the available parking spaces.
It will have been looked at because the council's highways officer has looked at this site specifically, and they've given comments on it. So, and I've seen on others where if she's not happy with the disabled parking provision, she does bring it up as an issue. There's one that we're dealing with recently, I've literally dealt with today, where there has been an issue with it. So given that she hasn't brought it up as an issue, I would think that that is something that is acceptable in this instance.
Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you, Chair. To go back to Councillor Hollier's point, my question is the commercial, commercial space. When it was agreed at outline that it would be retail or whatever class use A2, class E, there was no opportunity, I don't think, when that outline was granted to say we want this to be a community use. I remember it being described as a dementia cafe, for example, and that actually did influence, to what extent, it's hard to say, but that did influence how the decision went. Now, if there's a plan to lose a dementia cafe, that I think is a marked difference, and whilst it would still fall under class use E, I think members at the time wanted it emphasising that, because I remember this application very clearly, that they did feel that that dementia cafe was a significant feature. So if you're now saying, sorry,
I will just clarify something.
so if you're now saying that there was nothing in what we agreed outline that stipulated that it should have that use, it kind of defeats the whole object. If you'd have just said it's class use E, and it can be whatever it wants when it comes to the reserve matters, that might have had a different impact.
Just for clarification, the outline application was for outline application with all matters reserved, except for access, layout, scale, for the erection of a maximum of 607 residential apartments 130 square metres retail or community use floor space. And it says flexible uses incorporating use classes. And then it talks about the gas governor compounds, site remediation. So it doesn't say specifically which it will be in terms of the use classes, because it does say retail or community use. And then it would be a flexible use within that. At that point, it wasn't E, it was A1 to A4/D1.
I'm not arguing, I'm not arguing the point of what was written down. I'm talking about what the committee wanted and made significant reference to. Now, if you haven't written that down, that it ought, you know, the committee felt that it should have been what it was designed as, or what it was advertised as, which was a dementia cafe. That's not our fault. We made it very clear that that was a significant feature for the committee.
It wasn't conditioned as such as part of the approval of the outline. There wasn't a condition that said it had to be a dementia cafe as part of the original outline approval. And I think what
you can't make a sorry, Becky, I don't mean to,
no,
I don't mean to argue the toss with you, but you can't make a condition that a retail use has got to be a dementia cafe. That's not a legal condition. So how could we have legally conditioned?
But there wasn't anything in the conditions that specifically tied it to one use or the other. It would have depended on, I can't remember enough detail of the debate, I'm afraid. Sorry, I just had to clarify that between Jonathan and myself because I'd misunderstood. It is actually provided within this space here. I'd said it wasn't, didn't I, earlier on, and that was wrong. I apologise for that. It is, you see this cream area, what colour? This area here, that's where it will go. That's where it will be provided. So that the 130 square metres is within this block. It is there. It's just not outlined specifically what it will be used for. So I apologise, I got that wrong.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I mean, basically, it could be a florist. It was sold to us as a dementia cafe. It could end up being a florist.
I do take your point, Councillor Pavlovich, but I do think it is important to keep community, hopefully community spaces need to be kept fairly broad. I'm thinking very much of the space that was reserved for community use within the Hungate development. It was approved in 2003, I think, from memory. It actually started to come to fruition in 2000 and, well, I mean, we've only just opened it, so 2020. And during that time, our conception of what sort of community space would be wanted had changed a lot. And at one point, I wanted to come back to planning and get planning to rewrite the specification. But I was told it would be so complicated, I couldn't do it. So I do think you've got to, it does require a certain degree of flexibility because you just can't tell, you know, what sort of space people are going to want to use. But I think it's got to refer in some way to being open and used by the public and not, as Michael says, merely a florist, although a bookshop is quite nice, community space. Bookshop with a cafe is even better. Bring back borders, I say.
Other bookshops are available, I believe we need to say at this point as well, as well as that particular. Yeah, I'm reflecting, I think this is probably a learning curve for us as a planning committee. I think the same as you, we were expecting it to be a community space, not a commercial / community space. So I think to make sure we do learn from that in future, whether to know whether we can actually specify that retail is taken out and it is just community use, or if not, we're more aware as a committee that it is retail / community and it could be for community benefit, or it could be a supermarket for that. So we maybe better informed next time we make a decision.
So I just need reminding by officers what the full scope of what commercial includes. Could that include short-term holiday let and that sort of thing as a commercial venture? Is it retail?
No, it's specifically tied to, sorry, Jennifer, you can't say something. It was tied to, well, what was A1 to A4 and D1, which is now the use class E. But that's retail, restaurants, cafes, that kind of thing. Whereas your holiday let, depending on exactly where it'd fall, that'd be a C use, not an A use. Or E as it is now, just a confusion. Sorry.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Chair. Given the parameters of what we have to agree today, and notwithstanding my points, as Councillor Eyre has quite rightly said, the learning points that we should make in future when we get sold a potential pig in a poke is that we should accept the officer's recommendation with conditions as varied in your additional document.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we don't really have a full conclusion on the number of disabled parking spaces on site. And I'd like to suggest that whatever we decide, that is taken away and checked to make sure that it's appropriate and reviewed by others. Thank you. Yes, I will do.
You were seconding it, so that's proposed and seconded. Anyone else like to speak on this? In that case, it has been proposed and seconded, the recommendation to approve this with the amended conditions. We're all happy to vote on that? And the disabled, yes, the disabled access being policy compliant. Okay, all those in favour, please show. I think that is unanimous. So there's nobody against and no abstentions. Right. Thank you. We can move on now to the second application on this site, which is for Zone C. Which is a reserve matters application for 96 dwellings.
Thank you, Chair. So as Chair just said, this is Zone C. I will put my points around this zone that you're considering now. This is a slightly larger zone here that you can see. Zone C here with your buildings. You can just see the lighter blue there of the buildings with the landscaping and the car parking and the access in here. The proposed elevations, again, you can see it's been set back at the higher level. The detailed arrangement of the windows there, and again, north elevation and east elevation. And again, these more elevation plans of each of the blocks, so you can see again the setback at the top floor. And the detailed arrangement, that's block 3. So
this is your proposed floor plans, as you can see, the access in, the car parking, each of the 3 blocks that there is as part of this here, and the open space and landscape in there. Again, each of the floor plans, again showing it set in. These are sections, so you can see the existing properties and how the proposal will sit within it. It's not the easiest to see, but I'll outline it here. There and there in relation to the existing properties. That's not the best plan, I apologise. And again, the landscaping, general arrangement there. And then again, I'll say the visualisations, please also always rely on the elevations for making a decision. But these are the visualisations. You can see there. Okay. I will go back to the site plan. There is additional information. Again, same as the previous one. I've lost it. Hang on. Changes to the conditions and removal of condition 8 again, because it was covered as part of the outline, but that we have an informative instead. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any members got questions for officers? Councillor de Gore.
Yeah, just to clarify, looking at page 118, which is the conditions, looking at condition 5, which is connections, suspends connection temporary. Is that because the permanent connection is in the outline, but this is short term, or there's no, it doesn't really explain why we've got a temporary and what happens on a permanent basis?
Okay, so the long-term solution is that they'll use the road that runs around the public open space, which is outside the red line of the site. But in the short term, that land will be needed to build Zone B in due course. So we have a temporary arrangement until construction of Zone B is complete.
Right, thank you.
Any other members got questions? Councillor Pavlovich.
Will the trees be and the landscaping be protected for the lifetime of the development? Or I'm surprised we didn't condition it on last lot. Yeah, exactly. Where was he?
That was going to say, Councillor Fisher's already asked this. It was conditioned as part of the outline, but it was for 5 years. It wasn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
there you go.
but yeah, it was done as part of the outline that the landscaping scheme. But that, in all fairness, that's entirely reasonable from a planning point of view, because 5 years gives you enough time for it to bed in and become established, and then you can decide if it needs protection from that point onwards.
Councillor Deputy.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a similar line, and the previous graphic you had up showed the, I think it was described earlier as a Dutch style paving kind of sets, which is generally quite attractive. But just in terms of future maintenance, and particularly say if utilities had to dig up for whatever reason, how would that be maintained in the future? Wouldn't it be a simple case of just lobbing some tarmac to fill it in, would it? Could it be condition? Is there any condition that would ensure that the same material was used?
I think that depends on the adoption process. If it isn't going to be adopted, then that will be the developer's responsibility to resurface it. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because I mean, it can look awful if it's not, you know,
I
maintained.
don't have that detail, I don't think, in terms of if it's going to be adopted or not at this point in time.
Well, the applicants can clarify, but when we looked at it outline stage, the intention was that it was all to remain private and owned and looked after by the developer for the lifetime of the development. And as a consequence of that, some of the conditions we had on the outline were about maintaining the public accessibility to the things like the Sustrans connection and the public open space.
Sorry, Councillor Drummond, I'm just having a bit of a...
Supplementary to that, I mean, on the basis, obviously, as you say, the pavers look attractive, but if it's not going to be adopted, can we condition that appearance is retained for the lifetime of a development as a general principle, if that's what the design is?
I think if you could ask the developer what they're intending to do and then we'll come back to
I
it.
mean, we have got conditions about management and maintenance strategies, so it would probably fall under those conditions, if anything.
Sorry, I turned it off when I was having a chew on that biscuit, sorry. The second one is Mr. Tim Ross again with his team. If you'd like to come forward and have your 3 minutes. I think you know the drill.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. This application is another key part of bringing forward the development of the former gasworks for much needed housing, offering a unique opportunity to clean up this contaminated brownfield site, which has lain vacant for over a decade. As you know, in March 2020, the Council's Planning Committee granted outline planning consent, which approved the height, scale and layout and access for up to 607 new homes. As I said before, since then, there's been considerable progress on site to remediate the land and remove the gas holder and other unsightly gas infrastructure and replace it with new pipes under the ground. The new Sustrans ramp link and relocation of the foam mast now both have planning permission too. Again, this application is seeking approval for reserve matters relating to appearance of the proposed buildings and the landscaping only for Zone C, which provides 96 new homes. If approved, it's anticipated the construction work will commence as soon as possible, which will make an important contribution to the Council's housing delivery targets. Regarding the appearance and landscaping of Zone C, the design before members is the result of more than 2 years dialogue with officers as well as public consultation events. Again, the Council's planners, city architect and landscape architect have all written in support of the proposal. The police also wrote in support, stating that from a designing out crime perspective, the proposal is to be commended. The key merits of the proposal for the Zone C include a new 2,500 square metre neighbourhood green, which is open to everybody, including a child playground and exercise trail to be used by the local community. 130 new trees will be planted in Zone C. There'll be a communal allotment for residents. Again, we've got high quality architecture with an emphasis on horizontal banding and a pavilion's design style, which is sensitive to the conservation area and overlooks the neighbourhood green. Again, the creation of a pedestrian cycle-friendly high quality environment. And Arrival Street is proposed as a green tree-lined street with private terraces overlooking the street. And there's excellent private and shared amenity space proposed, including front and rear gardens, inset and sculptural balconies and terraces. Again, inclusive design measures, including accessible dwellings and landscaping. And the development provides a choice of good quality accommodation, including duplex and dual aspect apartments. Again, electric vehicle charging and cycle parking is provided in accordance with the Council's requirements. The officer recommendation is to approve the remaining reserved matters in relation to appearance and landscaping, and I hope members can support the proposal too. Thank you for listening. Again, we've got Stephen, the architect, Mike Phillips, project manager, and Mark Shilton on the line, who's the landscape architect, to answer any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Douglas.
Thanks. This is going to be a slight rerun of the questions I asked you previously. So the brick on this building, where are you at with that?
Again, throughout this sort of 2-year conversation with the city architect, we've always proposed a lighter buff brick for this particular zone. The reason for that is we want it to be sort of subservient to the park itself. So it's almost like a backdrop to the landscape, to the greenery that's there. So the choice originally was a lighter buff. We've moved on in conversations fairly recently, in the last month, to create more flint tones and reds and coppers that are built into that. Again, obviously it'll be conditioned, and we still need to get to the point of agreement with case officers and the city architect on the brickwork.
Okay.
Just to give members a little bit more comfort, we've actually provided additional elevation drawings, which are the ones numbered in the list of approved documents, which have a 0.1 at the end, and they actually specify in the key that the type of facing masonry will be buff, cream, copper and flint mix. So we can't move away from that when proposing these samples on site.
Thanks. So I'd raise the same issue about the tarmac that you use again, look at environmentally friendly versions of tarmac. And then disability parking in this block is really quite concerning, to be honest. Of the 60 spaces, there's 2 disabled accessible spaces in total in Zone C. Can I ask you how that was come to when 10% of the population are disabled?
I mean, I think the case officer Jonathan alluded to this. We've been in discussion with the council for years, actually, in terms of provision and the layout of the car parking. And this is an overall provision, so it will be taken with Zone A as well. This has the largest car park, and that was what was deemed to be appropriate for this car park. In consultation with the highways team at the council. I mean, that's where we ended up, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd just like to make everybody aware that between zones A and C, there are 105 parking spaces and 6 of those are for disabled and accessible spaces. So it's quite a low percentage, as you can see. Right, thank you.
I mean, I could sort of add to that. I mean, the visitor spaces, particularly on Zone A, have sufficient space around those car parking, which provides some provision for people who are parking them and were disabled that have space around that space. So, and also some of the areas here do have extra space for people with disabilities to access and use that space more easily. I mean, there isn't a clear policy that the council has on car parking provision, and that's the difficulty for developers trying to work out what provision is appropriate. We've had discussions with the highways team, and this is where we're at, and they haven't objected on those grounds.
Councillor, please. So a simple question, would you object to having an extra 4 disabled parking spaces on this zone?
Well, it's how you would squeeze it in, I suppose. I mean, this is the master plan.
It's not squeezing it in. It's off the. It's just putting some yellow lines down for extra parking spaces.
Well, it would be. I mean, if you look at that plan, for example, where you've got because you need obviously the extra space around the car parking space for it to be a disabled space. So would it be at the expense of potentially a tree or a planter at the end of some of those bays?
Councillor Gordon, doesn't necessarily have to be. But you didn't answer my question, would you? So you would be against adding an extra 4 disabled parking spaces in if we were to add that as a condition?
The issue is how you squeeze it in, because it changes that layout, doesn't it? If you're adding in, you need extra space for it to be a disabled space. No, I mean, in principle, but all I'm saying is this is how it's been laid out and designed, and it's been tracked in terms of vehicle tracking. We're not averse, obviously, to providing additional accessible spaces. I suppose what I'm saying is it's not as easy as just agreeing it now, because it would require a redesign of that car park to squeeze them in.
If I could just add to that, we did have conversations during this whole process where we had used up more of the car park space, sort of hard landscaped area, and we were asked to put in more tree planting into the car park. So the tree planting that we've got in the sort of centre spine there is being re-added in at the detriment to space that we have in that particular area, and that's just to sort of create that soft landscaping zone between our blocks and the Heworth Green area. So any further that we take out is going to be very difficult to place in there.
Councillor Parravit.
Thanks, Chair. I don't think anybody, just if I'm understanding the questioners, were saying they want more car parking spaces. They're just saying of the existing car parking spaces that you're having, can more of them be have the words disabled painted on the ground? So it's not saying we want more parking. It's just can what is there, more of it be designated for disabled.
But in order for it to be an accessible space, it has to have the clearance around the edge of it. That's what makes it an accessible space. So you can access the site from one side and from the back in a wheelchair. So it requires a greater space requirement for an accessible space.
So for every...
Sorry.
Assuming that's a diagram, then those two right next to the disabled one have the exact same amount of space as the two. I'm assuming the bottom one's there. Yes, the ones next to them, you can do exactly the same to that, and you've got number two as the other side.
For every single disabled space, it will take up 2 normal spaces essentially because of the requirements. So if we add more in, it'll be at the detriment for the amount of car parking.
Yes.
It seems to me that this is an area where we used to have a policy and now we don't. So it seems to me that if we look at the administration and say, why haven't we got a policy on this, which gives developers clarity and understanding when they're setting out their designs as to what we as a council require. And therefore, I would say, can we create, as a matter of some urgency for those developers who are coming along, a policy on what we require as a percentage, as Councillor Douglas has said, that we should create a policy on parking in the same way that create policies on all sorts of other things. Would this help?
I see what you're saying, but I think that may happen in the passage of time as a way of maybe for this site, we could maybe, if members wanted, put a condition that said, notwithstanding the details submitted, that we would look to provide more car parking spaces to this site. It'd have to be zone C because you already voted on it. But if you do want to put more disabled car parking spaces, it would result in the loss of the other car parking spaces. So we can't, potentially 2 to provide another 1. It depends how many more. Yes, we can do it, but I think you've got to give us a very clear remit on how many more spaces you wanting to see and know that there will be a loss of the others to accommodate that. And I don't think anybody from listening, nobody has an issue with the loss of the others. It's just how many extra you want to see. And that's not an unreasonable thing to say. It's just that our highways officers look at each case on each site, you have to say this to you all the time, on a case by case basis, and look and see what they think is required. Obviously, you've decided in this case that there is a need for more. So then if you do want to do that, you need to give us very clear guidance on how many more you want to see. And then we can structure a condition around that.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. I think, in line with our equalities policies in the council generally, we need to be looking at this. It's really quite important, I think, although obviously it's within the parameters of planning. I know that. Can I ask a question you may or not want to answer? I don't know. You're talking about conversations you've had with highways in York, but in your experience working with other authorities in other areas, are the numbers similar or greater or less, or do they vary greatly?
It's often 10% of car parking provision is provided for accessible dwellings. I used to work for a London borough and that was the London plan position.
Councillor Gwen.
Yeah, just changing the topic slightly. You've made provision for 4 EV points and potential for 4 more. But within a decade, we're supposedly going to have everything, all new cars will be EV. So do you have a longer term strategy in terms of how that would be provided so all the spaces have capacity?
Well, again, this goes back to the outline consent, which required for the whole development, including Block B, it required 9 EV charging points to be provided now, and when the development comes on stream, and a further 9 to be passively provided. Now, A and C are providing 9 in total physically, and C has an additional 4 passive provision. So that's already exceeding the requirement for these 2 zones. I think the developer will have to respond to those issues as residents demand them. An important point about this development is it's the biggest part of it, which is Zone B, is build to rent. So with that in mind, the developer there will want to keep their residents happy, and inevitably they will have to respond to market demand for electric points.
Councillor Waters.
And just to add to that, obviously, if you're keeping it as a private development and you're not intending having the roads adopted, it's in everybody's best interest for you to put sufficient capacity in, so you're not digging roads up in 5 or 10 years' time. So obviously, they are going to do it.
Yeah, the cabling underground is absolutely critical to expanding the network. You can't do it very easy unless you put the underground cables in before the actual site is commissioned. So it's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, there will be ducting in place anyway.
Right.
There's 2 substations on site as well.
As long as you've made for provision for electric vehicles, that's fine. Any further questions? Nope. In that case, thank you very much for your input, and we can move on now to final questions for officers. Are there any final questions for officers that you would like to put? Councillor Douglas.
Thank you. So Becky, what is it possible to condition around parking for disabled and accessible spaces? Because we've just approved, well, we haven't approved yet, but between the 2 applications, there's 105 parking spaces, and 10% of that is a minimum of 10 places overall. The last application had 4. So in principle, this one should have 6. And also, I know a good colleague of mine would say that they should be spread around as well, so there's accessibility to different areas of the site to allow people to not have to walk too far. How can we go about getting that right? Thanks.
As you've said, there's 4 on the previous one, and that would be, well, we consider it sufficient. There's 2 on this one, and they're located as close as possible to the main building there. But you'd need to add another 4 if you wanted to add the 6. And if that's something that members considered necessary, we could add a condition that required an extra 4, but that may result in the loss of 6 car parking spaces potentially. So you might have 4, but then you'd lose other car parking to provide that. So I mean, that is something that we can do. We can put a condition that says, notwithstanding the details provided, 6 spaces, or we'd need a scheme really, because we'd need to look at it to make sure it's fit for purpose. But it'd be a scheme that would include 6 disabled car parking spaces for this zone. We could do that. That's not unreasonable.
Councillor.
Just as a follow-up on that one, in terms of the loss of parking spaces, obviously we've consulted on this and we'll be approving it on the basis of that number of parking spaces. If we're putting 6 in, we're probably losing 4. We know where those vehicles are going to go. They're going to go to the surrounding areas in Heworth and parking on that particular thing. Are we putting ourselves in difficult grounds in terms of those people who may have wanted to object on the basis of 56, 57 parking spaces, haven't had the opportunity to?
Right, okay. So there isn't, this is Jonathan,
so there is a condition as part of the outline that stipulated how many car parking spaces there were in each zone. So zone A was 45 and zone C was 60. Is that right? Yeah. So they would.
That fixes a minimum number. So we'd be in breach of the outline permission if we changed it and made more disabled parking spaces at the expense of car parking spaces.
So yeah, you could do it, but yes, you would be in breach. So it's a.
So I guess any extra space we'd try to make up would likely be at the expense of the soft landscaping. So I guess there's maybe 1 or 2 spaces you could lose there without much impact, but as you said before,
you're likely to lose these areas here and maybe some of the landscaping along here, I would think.
And that was my concern. At what point are we changing the application to such an extent that people haven't had the opportunity to comment on or view what's been proposed? Because people will quite like having that landscape over.
Yes, it just depends on the level. Sorry. Yes, what you are saying is entirely right. So it's that balance that you will need to think about making in terms of, obviously, one extra car parking space you could accommodate there without having one extra disabled space you could accommodate, in my opinion, without making too much of a difference. If you're going to put an extra 4, that will have a significant difference.
I'll take Councillor Fenton, then Councillor Waters.
Chair, can I just?
Sorry. Yes.
Becky, I'm slightly concerned if Jonathan has referred to a condition on the outline consent, which says that there must be a certain minimum number of car parking spaces. And you're now suggesting that the reserved matters would resile from that outline consent by reducing the number of parking spaces.
I think you could do it it all depends on the number, doesn't it, of spaces that we're wanting and exactly how it works. I think there are ways around it that you could still provide it. It's just that discussion of how we do it. I mean, a scheme, I think if members wanted to do it, we could say we want a scheme and then we try and work it out away from here to get the best possible scheme while still complying with the outline and trying to achieve as much as possible while also keeping a bit more balance, I think, potentially, if we did a scheme that way.
I'll take Councillor Fenton first, then Councillor Waters, then Councillor Nelly.
So I think what I'm hearing is that there are some aspects of the application that were agreed at the outline that we can't amend without causing difficulty. But presumably at the outline stage, the details of the soft landscaping was not agreed. So that it seems to me there is some flexibility, particularly with the soft landscaping within the car park itself. So I'd be happy if we could resolve for officers to discuss with the developers how some of that space could be alternatively used in order to create the room for additional accessible car parking spaces in a way that would not reduce the overall number of spaces that we've heard was set out in the outline approval.
That's supplementary.
Yeah, I think Councillor Fenton makes a really valid point. You know, the law of unintended consequences, we agreed something at outline. We've now been caught out by that because we want to make some changes that realistically will be difficult to do. So I think Councillor Fenton's suggestion of amending the soft landscaping, which isn't necessarily, it's, you know, we're talking about planters to add disabled parking spaces. I think we have to decide what our priority is, and I would have thought that the disabled parking spaces were the priority. So so that's where I'd agree with Councillor Fenton's suggestion.
Councillor Waters, then Councillor Nelly.
Thank you, Chair. I would just question as to whether this is actually fair on the developer who's drawn plans up, you know, in line with the outline permission. They've come here in all in all confidence that they've complied with everything, and would seem as though we're just making policy up on the hoof. Now, if it's the fault of the council because we haven't got a policy on percentages of disabled parking in different types of developments, then the council needs to go away and formulate a policy. It shouldn't be done here now to the detriment of these developers. Now, if they are willing to enter into friendly negotiations to discuss this, fair enough. But we shouldn't be banging a condition on, again, just made up on the hoof.
Councillor Melly and Councillor. Oh, sorry, is this supplementary? Sorry, Councillor.
Mine's. Oh, never mind.
I'll take Councillor.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. So I just wanted clarification on exactly what we're discussing, because paragraph 5.15 says the outline commission caps the number of parking spaces at 60 and doesn't actually specify what the minimum is. And the other thing I want to say was just, in support of the developer here, on page 114, paragraph 5.22, says that 44% of the dwellings in this zone meet, are compliant in terms of being accessible and adaptable. I think that's really great, but that effort is going to be undermined if it doesn't come with the parking that's needed to actually make that accommodation accessible.
So yeah, that's not the right term. I've put capped in the report, but looking back at the outline permission, that's incorrect. The permission is worded as at least. So it's the opposite. It's an error in the report, I'm afraid.
Is this supplementary, Councillor Melly? Yes.
Yes, sorry, because I just want clarification exactly what that condition is then, because it says in the report that it's capped at 60, yes, but allows a further 10. So if it's not capped at 60, if it's at least 60, then what's that?
Yes. The condition from the outline trumps what that said. That's just a mistake. That's just a typo.
So what's the further 10 in relation to? If there's no cap, then what is that further 10 spaces? So is there
I'm taking it that there's a number, so it's 60 for this zone, there's a number for the other zone, there's a number for the other zone, then they can distribute another 10 across the 3 zones if they need to. So it's minimum 60, maximum 70. I'm guessing.
Yeah,
yeah. So my supplementary, Chair, was, and I hate to disagree with Councillor Fenton, but assuming that drawing is to scale, no amount of removing the soft landscaping that we're referring to gets you the numbers that you want. If you look at it, basically taking 4 spaces to achieve 2, but take out all that stuff. If you take those top 2, for example, of each block, you would have to eat into the access roads to create the space. So the soft landscaping doesn't give you enough to create the disabled spaces. You would have to take the soft landscaping and half of the access road.
Well, no, but it depends how many disabled spaces you want. If you want 1 more, then yes, you could do it. But if you want in 4 more, there's no way you could do it.
Yeah, that's my point. You're basically going to lose two spaces for every 2 disabled spaces. So if you put 2 in, you drop it by 2. If you put 4 in, you drop it by 4, and then you're no longer policy compliant. I think we just need to be aware what that threshold is to become because the soft landscaping isn't going to help us. You could take out all of that soft landscaping within it, and it wouldn't create you enough space to create.
Not enough for, I think,
any of the spaces.
I think you could reasonably get 1 more from some of that. But I mean, again, that's it. I think that's the best I can advise you.
And then I just want to be clear on the policy.
Yeah.
The council has never changed its policy. There's been the new local plan hasn't been adopted, so we're still on the 2005 plan. So if there was a 10% plan in, it's still in. If there isn't a 10% plan now, there never has been one. So no vote has ever been taken to change that policy. So either it was never present or it's still present.
What we are saying is there is a condition as part of the outline that we need to be very mindful of, as Sandra quite rightly says. If you do want to change anything, it would only be a minimal amount of change that we could possibly achieve if we did do it.
I'll take Councillor Waters and Councillor Warby.
Would a way around this be simply to put an informative in, inviting the developers to continue discussions with the council, bearing in mind what's been said tonight regarding the provision of disabled parking, and bearing in mind they're going to have to come through with the the other reserve matters for the rest of the site?
Unfortunately not, because you're approving the plan. If you look at one of the conditions specifically approves the plan. So if you want to change it, we'd have to put something on, as I said before, saying notwithstanding the details, we'd want a scheme for car parking provisions on the site. Because we've specifically tied it to the plan, that's why you can't put informative on. It won't work that way. But I would defer back to what I said originally. The highways officer hasn't at any point said she has concerns about the disabled spaces at this site.
So I honestly think continuing in this vein is unfair on the developer.
Is this supplementary, Councillor Melly, or not? No, Councillor Warby then, please.
Thank you, Chair. If this diagram is to scale, the left-hand side of the car park side there, it's the same height, you know what I mean? You've got 5 spaces there as the one on the right, but you've got 2 disabled in there. So how can you not put another disabled on the left-hand side? It's the same, if it's to scale, it's the same distance up, and you've got 2 disabled on the right and none on the left. That's one space. And then I was thinking on the diagonal bit, sorry if so on the diagonal, the 2 on the diagonal in front of that, Becky, up a bit there. Yeah, why can't you put 1 more in there? That's adding 2 equals 4, because I can't vote on something that I'm not sure what's going to happen.
To give huge amounts of credit to Councillor Hollier, because I couldn't understand that, but he's actually right. Those ones you referred to are the electric EV charging points, so they're slightly wider
Oh, right. Okay.
than the ones to the right. If you look at the ones to the right of it, you see where the 2 are, it's equivalent to 4.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can, that's why those ones on the left equate to 1.5.
Thank you.
Right, I've got Councillor Pavlovitz first, and then I think Councillor Melly, then Councillor Waters.
To be honest, Chair, I think we can talk around this until the cows come home. We don't have a policy. We need to have a policy. I had an idea. I'm now convinced that that idea probably wouldn't work. Therefore, can I suggest that we just move on and vote for, you know, unfortunate though it is, and I think we do need to have a policy, and if it's 10%, then it should be 10%, and developers should know from the outset that it's 10% moving forward. But we can't do that on this one, so I suggest that we just move on if we can.
Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, I unfortunately tend to agree that it seems to be difficult to find a sensible route forward, but I do question as to whether we're just running roughshod over equalities concerns and possibly legislation as well, because how do disabled people have access to their homes if they can't get in and out of their vehicles, and they're more likely to use vehicles as well? I do think everybody, developer included, needs to think about this. And I'm loath to bring this up, but I also do know that the premium that these parking spaces are going for on site would make your eyes water. So losing them is a big financial shock to the developers.
Right, do we have a proposal or any? Yes, sorry, Councillor Melly, then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a shame not to have highways officers here to talk, to see if there's any other space that isn't landscaping, isn't car parking space that can be removed. You know, how much space is needed for manoeuvring? Is any of it wider than it needs to be? That sort of thing, to see if there's anywhere else where a parking space could be put. I'm just wondering if there's a way of approving it in a flexible way so that more disabled parking can be added, instead of saying that it has to be rigidly adhered to this plan. If there's just a slightly different way of approving it, to leave that flexibility and maybe delegate it to chair and vice chair or something for final approval.
Councillor Waters.
I was just going to say there's been many times over the years when different chairmen have said it's not the job of the planning committee to redesign a drawing. With that, I would like to move deferral pending further consideration of the disabled parking issues as raised at planning committee. See whether anybody will second that.
Would anyone second that? Councillor Melly, you're going to second that, are you?
Yes, I am.
Right. In that case, we'll take a vote on deferral. I think it's the best way to do, and then we can, if deferral is not approved, we can move forward to look at the actual application. So those in favour of deferral, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against deferral. 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that is lost. So does anyone want to put in a motion, please? Thank you. Councillor.
There was a question actually.
Question.
I kind of agree with Councillor Pavlovich, but I think we might be able to sneak one in. Is there any way we can defer it to have a condition or something that says basically maintaining the minimum 60 that is required? The maximum amount of disabled parking spaces are included, and I suspect that will be one more, but which isn't ideal. But
Yeah.
so the question would say that the number of disabled parking spaces is increased to the maximum amount possible while maintaining the minimum number of 60 spaces as per outline. So you could get one more and you would then have 60 spaces and 3 disabled, which is still crap, but better than nothing.
You would have to do it as I previously said, say notwithstanding the details provided, we need a new scheme because of the fact that we've got those plans on there. And then we go away and do exactly what you just said with the developer.
Can I propose what you've just said then? What everyone's just said.
Yeah. Okay.
That's seconded, right.
Yeah. Can I just check, could that be done through delegation or does it have to come back to the full committee?
No, I would ask that you delegate the final word into myself and the chair and deputy chair.
Did you not hear me say that, Becky, when I was just speaking?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
So that's been proposed and seconded. Does anyone else want to speak before we vote? In that case, could you just read out exactly what that was so everybody is absolutely clear? Because there has been a lot of toing and froing. I think it's important that we know exactly what we're voting on.
We're voting on the recommendation and the amendments in the additional information and an additional condition that says notwithstanding the details provided, we require a scheme for on-site car parking. And then I'll have to look at the exact wording of how I make it watertight, and then I'll agree that with myself and the chair and deputy chair.
Are you all happy with that? Not happy with it, but are you all content that is something we can vote on? Right, all those in favour, please show. 15, I think. Maybe 15. Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the official business of the night. Can I thank you for your contributions and for getting through in a reasonable time? There is one further question I would want to put round, is about whether we want to return to physical site visits. We had that representation from Johnny Hayes about this. What I propose to do is send a missive round you during the course of this week to canvass views. Sorry.
On that, could I just make the point?
Sorry, can't hear because there's too much background noise.
Thank you. Just make the point that whether or not we return to everyone having to go on site visits, some form of hybrid could be of benefit. And if we do that, I think we should actually return in terms of transparency. We should return to the position where developers and local residents can have access to that site visit as well, because I think at the moment, you know, we're having that effectively a private session, which we shouldn't really be having prior to.
I'm just going to come in here. We're entirely reasonable. We can have that session in terms of a virtual site visit. That is something that we can do. But we are looking at
that we should make it accessible to the.
We are looking at exactly how accessible we make it, whether or not we invite ward councillors or we are looking at it, but it will be
from a COVID point of view. It could be.
Yeah, we have to be very, very
Yeah,
careful from a COVID point of view. Yeah, Councillor.
I mean, it's trying to pick up the best of both worlds. On a very personal level, I find the virtual site visits absolutely fantastic. I get a much better view. I can't walk too far these days, and it really does enable me to participate in site visits, which I had stopped doing for quite a long time. But I do accept that I do think certainly residents need to be able to articulate their views. And I can't see why they can't do it, in a sense, through the Zoom procedure. Because, you know, I was looking at the, you know, as we were looking at Huntington yesterday, it would easily have been able for people to come along and just speak into the video and just say, and we would listen to them, we could hear them, we could, if we needed to, ask questions, that we don't engage in a lot of discussion on those visits. But you could do it.
We are looking at the best way of doing that, and I think it's just exactly whether or not we look at how we, if we record. I promise you, we're looking at it. We're just trying to find the logistics of the best way around it. But yes, we're on with it.
Good. And finally, I omitted to thank our officers for their attendance and contributions as well. Thank you very much.